it's that time of year, colloquially known as flu season. I don't buy into that. Obviously, I think it's that we're spending more time indoors, less time out in the sun, less time detoxifying, all the things. And so because of that, our bodies are brilliant and they're running, for many of us, their natural program to rid themselves of the waste inside. And that ends up being with me like a stuffy nose and a cough and things like this. So you were walking me through off camera the method to help sort of drain some of that. So let's do that. And if I get like snot all over my shirt, I'm blaming you, and we'll just pause for a second. But okay, guide us through it, please.
Yeah. So take your 2 fingers and we're going to just start rubbing underneath the ears. And all we're doing here is we're asking the fluids within our head to start to drain through our body. So our lymph system actually dumps back into, like, recycles itself right above the heart. So we're just going to pull down. And if you feel tension on one side compared to the other, like if the tension is asymmetrical, just witness that and know that this part of your body would like some more flow, some more movement. So as you do this, start to explore behind the ear. You could just take 2 fingers and you can rub in little circles. And what we're doing is asking our lymph nodes to drain. You can go over the ears for people who wear glasses like me. Sometimes it gets stuck here. And the lymph nodes actually come across the eyes, right, to the ears. So if you want, you can just do a little tapping here, or you can kind of massage open. And while you're doing this, I want you to start to activate your tongue. So if you slow motion swallow and start being aware of the back third of the tongue. Okay, so if you're doing this right, you're going to feel a cinch underneath the chin. And as you do that, I want you to take a big, deep inhale through the nose while you're moving the fluid around your ears. And you might start to feel the need to swallow. That's good. So the adenoids is the first part of our lymphatic system, and it sits right behind the nasal glands. Mm-hmm. But the lymph system is actually operated by our breath. So the deeper we breathe, the more flow we create. So as you're activating that back third of the tongue against the soft palate, take a big, deep inhale through the nose. Keep the tongue there. Now, you might just feel the sensation of air at the tip of your nose. Take another deep breath and try to widen the space. The nasal glands actually come out into the middle of the eyes and then all the way to the eyebrows. So take a few breaths, each time trying to pull the air a little deeper. If you feel like one side is stuck, you can actually take your knuckle and just create small circles in that side of the face. So I'm a little congested on the right side. The pollen changed here. The humidity is different than where I'm used to. So this is just normal part of waking your face up. Take another couple deep breaths and try to pull it all the way to your eyebrows. And when we exhale, try to exhale all the way. So touching that air hunger, and just a few more. If you need to, you can actually pull the outsides of your nose apart to create a little more flow in there. How does that feel?
So much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a lot better. Wow. Okay. I'm going to read your bio now.
Okay, all beautiful.
Right. Thank you for that. That was Rebecca's idea. Shout out to Rebecca, who's off camera right now. Okay. Brooke McPoyle, founder of Musical Breathwork, is unveiling the once misunderstood rhythms of interconnection. A mighty breath coach since 2014, Brooke developed a groundbreaking biomarker equation that harmonizes the body's fascia, guiding mind, breath, and tension into alignment. Her diverse path from Division I collegiate golfer to health center founder, recording artist, and visual artist reflects a life dedicated to flow and creativity. Through musical breathwork, she empowers gamma seekers to tap into their own rhythms, transforming pain into vitality. Discover her courses, lectures, and creative work at musicalbreathwork.com, or you can just head to the show notes of this episode to learn more about Brooke. And I'm sure you're going to learn a lot of amazing stuff on this episode. So naturally, given that you shared that you were a Division I golfer, a recording artist, and of course, when we were at dinner last night, you were like sharing so many things about your life, and you've had such a diverse experience, as many of us have. Like, I was a freaking handball player. I was an Army captain. I used to be a basketball player, like so many different things. But it's so cool to sort of learn someone's journey from how they transformed from that thing that they were doing before, in your case, a golfer, a Division I athlete, to now talking about what you talk about now. And oftentimes that comes with like a direct experience. I think that is the case with you, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, my body has been a little bit of a work in progress since I was born. When I was born, I ended up with a lot of earaches. My right foot was actually twisted. I had to wear certain orthotics. And by the time I was about 10, I had developed some pretty severe hip issues. And the doctors never told me what to do. They were just like, oh, nothing we really see is wrong. But the soft tissue around my hip was kind of messed up. I was absolutely in love with music from the beginning of my life. I think it was kind of natural for me to fall into learning how to play guitar. And I loved everything about rock and roll. My dad brought me to an AC/DC concert when I was 12. And we had like seventh row center concert. It was like a core memory of my life. And I got high-fived by Brian Johnson during the song Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. And that song is all about bringing rock and roll to the next generation. So the joke in my family is that like Brian Johnson passed the torch to me in that moment. So I learned how to play guitar, and my dad got me a good coach, and I learned how to play pretty good, pretty quick when I was younger. But I felt a little disassociated to my body because when you're playing guitar, you're really just sitting. And as much as I could hear songs in my head and started writing music at a young age, I really was called to use my body in a different kind of way. And lucky enough, my dad was a golf pro for a period of time. He's runs his own business, but an incredible player. And my brother and I learned how to play when we were about 16 years old. And we had built-in competition. And my dad's a big believer in if you want to learn something, fail. So we were like, we want to learn how to play golf. And he's like, okay, you have a tournament in 30 days against a bunch of 8-year-olds. We were like, teenagers. And we got our butts handed to us that summer. And he taught me when you choose to fail, you learn very fast. In about a year, my brother and I went from, shooting 50 on 9 holes from the red tees to, pretty competent players. And then a few years later, I was actually able to walk on to the D1 team at FAU. And I basically negotiated my way onto that team. I don't think the coach was ever going to let go of me. She had she only had internationals that had been playing since they were 7 years old. So at 18 years old, I was hitting up the captain of that team. And I was like, hey, can I just take you out for a round of golf and I'll make you lunch and we could play. And so I was sucking up to the captain of the team to try to walk on. And it worked. I negotiated my way onto that team, and I was the hardest worker she had. And Coach Joan Joyce was who I played under. She's a world record holder and Hall of Famer in 4 different sports. So to me, she was the woman I wanted to play for more than anybody. And she was a sequence builder. So she didn't learn how to play golf till she was 40, and she went pro at 42.
Wow.
And when I got to be coached by her, everything to her was math. And she broke the chessboard of golf down into sequences. And I think she was really the developer of my love of sequences. So most of the way that I deconstruct everything that I dive into now is look at the greats, the greatest of that industry, and then deconstruct their process. And she taught me how to do that with putting and with chipping. And she had the world record for a really long time. It just got beat. For the lowest number of putts ever in an 18-hole round, it was 14 putts. Wow. She had chipped in 6 times.
Wow.
And she had developed the short game sequence that was all about simplicity. And, she would chip very different than how most people teach it, but it created incredible consistency because you are working on 80% success rate. So everything turned into stats with her. Mm-hmm. When I was about to graduate college, the month of your senior year is the most important because those are the scores that you take to your sponsors. And during that month, you travel a lot. You're gone every week for a tournament. You're taking finals when you're at home. And you train, in my case, I trained for 7 years for that last month of tournament play. And in that month, I had 5 friends pass away. And I really went into a state of shock. You're 21. You are, for the most part, invincible. I had never had to go to that many funerals in my life. And it became like a waterboarding experience for my mind because I'd get off the plane, I'd take a final, and I'd go to a funeral. And then I did the same thing the next week. And I did the same thing the next week. And my teachers were almost like, are you kidding? I was like, no, I'm sorry. I have to take the test at another time. I really want to go to this funeral. And they were young kids, people I grew up with, my first boyfriend that I ever had, 2 kids that I was on the bus with. And it changed us as a community, those of us that grew up together. It made us sit with, what are you doing in your life and why are you doing it? And by the time I was playing my conference final championship, I had gone to 5 funerals that month. And we were in Alabama playing some of the most beautiful courses in the world. And for 7 years, all I really cared about was where this little white ball went. I was a little bit of a spoiled brat. I was around international teammates that had, their parents have 3 homes and, they've been out of the house for a while. It was a bit of a princess situation. We were kind of all a little spoiled and all really focused on the action of hitting a golf ball a bit obsessively. And I remember being out there and I had blew my chance at winning. And I experienced a detachment. It was beautiful bluebird day out there. I had messed up on the front 9. And I remember looking over at my parents and just being so grateful. I can still access like that intense emotion of just being so happy to be alive and happy to be out there and happy to have the opportunity. And it was a big mindset change because it was the first time that I relinquished the thought of needing to go pro or like needing to perform a certain way. And I think that was a real tipping point for my life. It was a real tipping point of, well, what is important? Is it really this little white ball? Is it really me leaving my family to turn pro? You have to look at traveling 36, 37 weeks out of the year minimum. A lot of my teammates are still like on the Thai tour, on the European tour, playing for the Italian team. And you see the sacrifice they make for their families. And at that moment, I had opened myself up to like, maybe I need to reconsider this. And I turned pro after I graduated, but I was burnt out. I was still kind of shoving my grief into my body, trying to just stay on course with the path. And I went and played this 36-hole round with somebody. You gamble a lot when you're turning pro because you're trying to elicit that adrenaline rush over the 3-foot putt. And
oh wait, like when you're practicing, essentially, you'll gamble a lot because you're trying to mimic what, like the pressure that the adrenaline and the pressure of playing in a real round of 18.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like
Makes
I can
sense.
practice all day on a putting green and make 150 putts in a row, right? But then when you get out there and you have that downhill slider, you've done it a million times, right? But what's the difference between missing it and making it? And to me, that is what fills the sports psychology books of golf. And it's a conversation about, are you internal? Are you external? Are you attached to the result? Are you fully committed to the shot? And it mirrors beautifully with what you learn as a singer. Because if I'm thinking about what I sound like, I've already divided my consciousness into 50%.
Yeah.
Now I'm not 100% concerned with where the pressure is in my body, how I'm committed to the shape.
So at this point, you were extrinsically motivated, essentially.
I was. It was more about the results. And when I started to really lean into what my soul wants in this lifetime. And I remember this round, we were gambling heavy. I dropped him off at the airport and he was like, man, I wish we could go out and play more golf. And I remember at that point, I felt I was done. I was like, I just want to go home and take a nap. And in the golf world, you train 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. If you're not in it, you're going to have somebody that outworks you. So I ended up quitting the sport. And I told my coaches at that time, I was like, I'm going to take a year off, which is pretty typical for a lot of D1 athletes. You take a pretty extensive break after college. And I just turned everything in my life upside down and I mourned. I really needed to grieve. I needed to kind of sit with what was most important to me. And through that time, I had 2 of my teammates actually get diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma from all of the glyphosates on the golf course. I mean, you're picking up a golf ball 100 times and you're cleaning it off with your spit on your mouth. And, you're inserting that chemical into your body. And when they got diagnosed, they were a touch older than me. I started to look at my health a little more seriously. I had some serious symptoms going on. My hip started to be a real problem. Both of my wrists are chronically inflamed. And even though I had the best PT and, access to all of, what college athletes have access to, there was a lot missing in the rehab. There was a lot missing in our concept of how you heal soft tissue and get rid of chronic inflammation. And as my friends were going through stage, chemo and surgery to get tumors removed, I started to do an intense detox protocol. I got super into Arnold Ehret's work, and I found a doctor who's now my ex-husband, who really helped make me better. And I had to detox my whole system. And during the detox, there was just a lot of symptoms for chemicals coming out of my body. So I'd go into an 18-hour water fast and I would be puking like a heroin addict on withdrawal. And thankfully, while they were going through that intense thing, I was able to deep clean my body. I got very into upper cervical chiropractic care. I found out that I had been born with a fusion in my upper cervical spine. So I have 3 vertebrae that are fused. And I think that that's actually a reason why I'm so into the nervous system, is I realized that my adrenaline issue when I was a golfer was partially caused because I had all this tension that had built up into the electric circuitry of my body. And as I started to learn more about the nervous system, how it regulates things, how it regulates our adrenaline, I got very into upper cervical chiropractic and other health modalities because I started to feel like for the first time my body was healing. So at 25, most people mistaked me for a 35-year-old woman.
Oh my goodness.
I had like some pretty severe sun damage, but my skin was stressed from all of the internal things that were going on. My stomach had kind of stopped working.
Yeah.
I had bad digestive. A lot of that may be chemical components from the glyphosates on the golf course.
But how much of that was the grief dealing with 5 people that passed away that you were close with in a month's time? Like, that's what sticks out to me. Not to like analyze your situation, but I am thoroughly convinced that for the majority of both physical and mental and, you know, other ailments, there's an emotional or trauma component to it.
Yeah. I mean, grief is an incredible teacher. And I think that I used music really to get through it. For me, it's therapy to pick up an instrument and to hear my own thoughts. I kind of hate learning cover songs. I hate learning songs from other people. To me, music is more of like being a bard. It's your soul speaking. It's a chance to hear what's on your mind and on your heart. And I wrote this song in that process called The Reaper. And it's one of my favorite songs I've ever written. And it reminds us that life is fleeting. It's such a short period of time that we get here. And often our hearts are so much wider and deeper than we allow to show. And death has this beautiful reminder that everything in our life will die. And if we receive that fully, we can really embrace where we are right here, right now. And no matter where we are, we always have more than we think we do. We are given so much by simply being able to see, to smell, to hear, to taste, to love, to touch. And I think that the Reaper has never left me after that experience. And it's a teacher. It's really it's a great gift to be familiar with the power of the Reaper.
So you're using chiropractic, beautifully said, by the way. I'd love to hear that song too, because you sent me some of your other music earlier and it was incredible. So you're deep into chiropractic, sort of leaning more towards natural health now, learning to detoxify. And then when did that transition into discovering the importance of fascia?
That happened by accident, and it feels like such a divine blessing. So there was a little bit of a question that I always had in the chiropractic office, and I thought we had the best chiropractic office ever. We did a stock 3D CT with Blair analysis. We did a
What is that?
pre-res.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So most chiropractors, you're looking at their structure and they can tell you like, oh, your hips are off, so your upper body is off, and then your neck is off. So if we tweak the neck, then all of these other things will happen. And I always had a little bit of a disagreement with that, but we'll return to that later. So Blair is a different way to analyze how the skull and the spine are connected, because the C1 and the C2 on the spine are differently shaped than all of the other vertebrae. They are almost like a sliding closet. Like if you can pop the slide off, you can have a neck that kind of seizes it up. And it's because at the bottom of our skull, we have these 2 little knobs. It's not like a normal joint. And these knobs are floating on these 2 little tracks, but these 2 little tracks often aren't perfectly symmetrical. They're usually a little bit off. And so the skull, when it pops over, we experience a subluxation, or the lack of light through the nervous system. And Blair would look at where the hole on the bottom of the skull was in relationship to how these bones fit. So instead of just looking at the structure from the skull to spine from the back, you actually on a 3D CT can go through the skull and then look at it top down, so that you're making an adjustment that's opening the flow between the skull and the center of the spine instead of just looking at the structure itself.
So you're looking at it across a 3D plane from the top view rather than looking at it in a two-dimensional plane from the side or the back view, essentially.
Exactly. It gives the chiropractor a lot more ability to open the flow strategically.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so we would do a pre-rest. So before somebody would come in, they would lay out for 10 minutes in a room chilled to a certain temperature, total darkness, only candles. And then we would run a Titron, and it's a thermography machine. So it measures temperature differences along the spine. And then this would happen every time. Most chiropractors only use that quarterly. This would happen every time. So clients could see exactly which nerves were firing well and which ones were not. And
this would happen at every adjustment.
Yes.
Wow.
And then after you get adjusted, you would go into a post-rest room for an hour minimum.
Wow.
So often clients only needed 1 or 2 adjustments in the first 3 months, and then they would come in once a month after that. My question always was, how could we make the adjustment more permanent? And the soft tissue around the skull is really what's holding the spine in place. So when people would trip or they would fall, they'd always go out of alignment in this one way. And some people were overweight, they wouldn't work out, so their misalignments would happen more frequently. And it made me naturally ask more questions. And as a golfer, because I was trained from the coaches that I was, which was a ground up approach based on the kinetic link system built by Michael Bentley, still very, underground in the golf world, but to me, the most karate-like, the most kung fu sequence to swing, I always believed that the feet had much more to do with how the skull and the spine were holding tension on one side compared to the other. So it was only 2 years ago I injured my foot. I've been teaching breathwork for a number of years. I lived in Colorado for a while. I did some art up there. I was teaching breathwork on the side and then always with a little artistic other hobby. And 2 years ago, I hurt my foot. I went to my naturopathic doctor, Dr. Bernardo Valero. He's amazing. And I was like, Bernie, something's going on with my foot. You got to help me fix it. And he's like, you don't have a foot problem. You have a fascia problem. And he started squeezing in my calf. And he's like, this is where it is. And it was like lightning from my calf to my foot. And he gave me a little bit of instruction and it sent me down a rabbit hole. And I fixed my foot. And it took me about, 100 hours of research and 2 weeks of experimentation. And both of my parents have knee problems. So I started palpating their calves, like, maybe you guys have a fascia problem too. So I taught them my sequence. Both of their knee pain went away within a couple weeks. So I was like, okay, maybe I should, introduce this to some of my clients that come and do breath work. It'd be a nice thing to break it up. So I introduced my fascia sequence to them. I'm always sciencey in my classes, so they were just into it. And then we did the breath work. And there was a huge shift in my class. I've been teaching breath work for a long time, the same kind of sequences. And I'm looking for people to deeply relax at the end. So we do our job, we clean things out, we get everything nice and open, and then I'm all about slow breath rates. And in the slow breath rate, my job is to get people to theta. Because if I can drop them through the language barrier into this 4 to 7 hertz, the brain has an opportunity to solve problems. I believe in the theta-gamma sync more than anything, so that's always my goal. Well, after we did fascia, 100% of my clients could drop into that state. And I could feel it because people were falling asleep over here. People were deeply restful. Everybody was maintaining the breath rate kind of without prompting. And it was huge. So I started introducing it more seriously and things in my clients started to shift.
Wow.
And I know that the link between releasing the fascia and the brain waves started to really take up a curious question for me. And as I started to explore, okay, well, what is meditation? Why are we concerned about meditation only in the mind? Maybe our meditation needs to be more full body. Maybe the brain waves are being altered by the body's tension more than we ever thought.
Mm-hmm.
So guiding people through the fascia and then the breath opened things up. The heart rate would drop lower. The brain waves would drop lower. And now I am so excited to bring this to people. And as the testimonials are flowing in, it's just an absolute delight because I feel like I stumbled upon the connection between them, you know, and I think that, you know, not only me, but that's going to be a real exploration in our generation of how can we use the body to drop into these deeper brainwave states.
Beautiful. Yeah. I'm so stoked to get into the deeper aspects of the connection between breath and the fascia, fourth phase water, like all the things that I'm sure we'll get into here in a little bit. But I want to start like very foundationally at first. And I guess before we get there, I don't know if it's appropriate and you can say whether it's not really relevant, how you got into breath work at first.
Oh, I kind of skipped over that.
Yeah, it's okay.
When I was 12, I was, you know, in a public school like everybody else, and I had the best choir teacher. So I had signed up, I was 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, I did choir. But I had like the greatest choir teacher in the whole world. His name is Mr. Gonzalez, and I hope that he knows how much he's changed my life. And I could remember, it was 4th period class, I could remember my energy just raising, like I just walking there, just like, all right, we're in route. And when you sing classically, you're taught how to diaphragmic breathe. And he did an extraordinary job at teaching us kids how to diaphragmic breathe. And he would roll us through our training. So the first 20 minutes of class, everybody would get warmed up. But he taught us how to nose breathe, because if you mouth breathe on a mic, like if you're recording, you can hear it like, you know, and it's funny. Some of my opera teachers, they teach giant mouth breaths. And I'm always like, I don't know about that. Different live versus recorded. And Mr. Gonzalez taught us how to clear the nose so that we could kind of have a clear head and then drop deep into our bodies. And when you sing, you are dividing the lung field really into 4 parts. But most people in the beginning, they only feel an upper and a lower. And our lung tissue is conical shaped. There's most amount of our lung tissue on the bottom. So as a singer, all of your power is from pushing the exhale down. This is just based on our physiology. So if you want me to geek out about it,
Go, please.
Okay. So our lungs are asymmetrical. Our right lung is significantly bigger than our left lung.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because the heart's in the way.
That makes sense.
Okay. And the lungs are separate from almost every other organ other than the heart. They live in this chamber in our rib cage. And the rib cage is a pump. So our lungs, sometimes people, like, because of the devices they make, they think the lungs can actually suck in pressure, and it all has to do with the muscles that are surrounding the lungs. The lungs are just sponges that fill with blood and are squished out. So the 2 muscles that pump the lungs, one is the diaphragm, and it's a U-shaped muscle that sits underneath the lungs. And when we inhale properly, it drops all the way flat. Most people have only used it about 20%. So when people say breathe into your belly, it's not that we have lung tissue in our belly. It's that we're trying to prompt the diaphragm to drop down. Now, the diaphragm has 3 ridges on it. So we can actually push against the sternum, the lumbar, and then the outsides separately. Belly dancers are like the masters of doing this. The other set of muscles that help pump the lungs are called the intercostals. Inner means between, costal means rib. And we have 3 layers of intercostal muscles on the inside, between the ribs, and on the outside. And they have different fibers. They go different directions. So as we learn to open the space inside of our lung field, we actually create more capacity. So the standard untrained lung can hold 5 to 7 cubic liters. What I teach people how to do is double their capacity.
Wow.
So the world record holders are around 22 cubic liters.
Whoa.
And the reason for that is the lungs are, when you look at the base of a lung, if it's inflated, it actually breaks into these asymmetrical bronchi structures. So the lungs are smashed against the muscles inside of our body, against the rib cage and the diaphragm. So when we learn how to feel them, make them flexible, and then make those muscles really strong and big, the lung tissue just opens. It's beautiful. So often we end up having like little particles in there, but Mr. Gonzalez taught us how to push the air from the upper lung field to the lower lung field. And the diaphragm can be trained intensely. Diaphragm is a very strong muscle. And a lot of opera singers, like Pink has a very famous video where she has like a 100-pound woman standing on her stomach and she's belting a song. So a way that I like to sing train is I'll put a 20-pound weight on my stomach, lay out flat, and then sing to the ceiling. And my job is to keep that weight up as long as possible, because that means my intercostals are pushing the air against the diaphragm.
Wow.
So if you think about it like an engineer, if I give it away down here and the air falls up here, I have almost nowhere to push.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about belting a note, it's all having to do with pushing the air down.
Mm-hmm.
So I got introduced to diaphragmic breath work and singing when I was 12. And it opened me up to a shape of the breath. And when you get into a more elite level opera, it's 4 parts of your lung field. So you have your lower front, your lower back, through your back, to your sides, to your chest. And then when you exhale, you push from the chest to the sides, to the back, lumbar, and then to the front sternum.
Wow.
So if you do it right, you end up just feeling this intense pressure on your sternum, and the top of your head is resonating super hard, and your molars feel like they're electric, and the sound's coming out of you in every direction.
Wow. So you learned breath work essentially through opera singing and playing with the different lung capacities, essentially.
I was a little obsessed, I think, with trying to make my voice very big.
Okay.
I was like, in the beginning, I was like a cute little folk player on my thing. And I ran into now my bandmate, Rustin Gross. He's a heavy duty metal musician. He plays like 22 instruments. He's amazing. I'm so honored and grateful that he's on my team. And in metal, you're singing, to the back of the room as loud as possible, a lot like opera. People don't realize opera is an acoustic situation. There's no mic on an opera singer. So you have a pit of 100 and some odd instruments in front of you, and you are belting to 4,000 people in a room. And if you're not completely resonating every tone, that person in the back's not going to hear you.
Wow.
In metal, there's a lot of overlap. You got to be loud. And to create a piercing vibration through your voice, you have to shape where the waves are going through your skull. So sound waves travel different in the body. You never hear yourself the way that you sound because our bones, our mandibles will vibrate. So singers, we sing into a corner so that you can hear yourself. And Rustin, I think, really turned the notch on my singing up about 40 points. He was like, put it on level 10. And to shake a room with your voice is a very different way to train because you get way deep into the breath. It's not just like hitting something that sounds pretty like Beyonce. It's about maxing out your vibration tone. And when you do that, you almost have to sing with earplugs in. And all you're doing is paying attention to how the vibrations feel in your body.
Wow. That's really cool. And you had mentioned, and I don't want to go off on a tangent on this too much, but about like singing in different churches as you were growing up and like the resonant sound that those older, let's say old style buildings would produce. I feel like that was just an environment that was more conducive to being able to have that reflection back to you of how well you were singing.
I am always hunting out good acoustical spaces.
Yeah.
I'm like always in a parking garage. Last night after you left, I was like whistling
you were
around.
You were doing it while we were leaving. While we were leaving dinner, my wife and I were like, wow, she can sing. Yeah.
I love the sound of huge spaces. There is something about throwing your voice off of a 200-foot ceiling.
Yeah.
That is hard to explain. It almost doesn't feel like the sound's coming out of your body at that point. And it's kind of not when you're doing it right. Like when our dogs are making sounds like that. That sound comes through our skull.
Yeah.
So in those big spaces, I feel like I'm able to get feedback that seldom I can get in a small room. And when I was a kid, we were in that choir that I was in was quite competitive. We competed against high schoolers and we crushed. He was such a good coach. And there was a few times we got to perform in these very old churches in New York. And I still remember with just like joy and a sense of warmth that these are the spaces that we are meant to sing in. And, side note, we don't have to go into it, but I believe that some of the Tartarian structures are cymatic structures.
Yeah.
And if you had 200 people in there humming the same tune, how is that resonance collected within the building? To me, the cymatics are integral to holding on to radiant energy, honestly, when we look at how sound waves are.
Not only what would that do to the building, but what would that do to the people inside the building? And oftentimes some of these buildings were built over the top of water cisterns that were holding the water for the entire city. So like, what was that resonant frequency, that sort of container that they were creating, that such, strong coherence? What was that doing to the water below that was then going to the rest of the city? But that's like a topic I could cover with other people too, because I want to talk to you about fascia and breath. In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic, founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. Okay, before we continue on and build upon the foundation and just start talking about fashion, going into all this esoteric stuff, which I'm sure we will for this episode, which is amazing, I think it makes sense to start at the very foundation and discuss what is fascia to sort of set that for the rest of the episode. So can you please describe to me what fascia is and why it's important?
Absolutely. Fascia is a triple helixed collagen fiber network. So when I say triple helixed, kind of imagine what that shape would look like. It's like a little nanotubular straw, a little soda straw, just like we find in the caves and the stalactites. And this soda straw by itself, quite malleable. So if you put your tongue on the side of your cheek, that's mostly collagen, that's mostly fascia there. And your saliva is made of a fluid called hyaluronic acid mixed with some enzymes. Now, through our body, we have these little collagen fibers that are moving a fluid through it and then around it. So this hyaluronic acid moves around the fascia and it allows it to glide off of each other. Now, the fascia in some areas of our body are, instead of one little nanotubule, imagine 50 straws put together. And that creates quite a sturdy structure. Mm. And these sturdier structures in our fascia bands hold tension. So at the bottom of our foot, we have something called the plantar fascia. And the plantar fascia is one of the densest bands in our body, and it connects the phalanges of the foot all the way down the center line to this hook here. But this I call it the industrial strength rubber band version of the fascia. So the fascia is braided together in certain areas of our body. So it's all made of collagen. There's a few cells in it. And it's all moving a fluid through it and around it. In some areas, they're braided together like these industrial strength rubber bands. And they form vertical fascia bands. So the plantar fascia hooks behind the heel and then separates into two and hooks behind your knee. And it locks into the joint here on something called a train. And then it starts up again behind the hamstring into two sections, goes around or through your hips, depending on how you're built, up through the spine, around the back of the head to the front of the forehead right here.
Wow.
So we have 9 of these. The superficial back line, and they call it the superficial back line because it's the first one if we were to cut a body open, first major one we would run into. Then we have the spiral line, that's underneath that. And we have the lateral band. And the lateral band's very interesting because most mammals don't have that. We're the only mammal that has something called a lateral band. It attaches to the outside of your foot, runs up the side of the foot, through the side of the body, over the intercostals, and attaches to the base of the jaw. And these major fascia, vertical fascia bands that are running up from the foot to the head are creating the tension within our body. So we have 26 fascia insertions to the back of our skull through these major bands. And when we start to look at the body less like a doctor, less concerned about the molecules and the chemicals, and we just look at it like an engineer, we would say, okay, if you have a lot of tension, like let's just say you tore your left hamstring at some point in your life from training. As we form new scar tissue, that's the fascia stitching itself back together. And as it stitches itself back together, oftentimes it kind of closes up and then it gets a little dirty in there. And if we were taught how to open that back up after it healed, we would be able to have nice equal tension. But most of us weren't taught that. So as we heal from old damage, maybe, we jumped out of a tree wrong when we were 12 and we landed weird and we tore something. So as this stitch kind of closes up, it can sometimes marry these layers of vertical fascia bands. So instead of them working independently with equal tension, we start to have this kind of knotty mess within that lower part. And then as we train, as we work out, as we exercise, that knotty mess starts to pull down slightly and it will drop that side of the hip a little bit. Or it might create some pain in that plantar fascia on that side of the body. And what I find is that when we have fluid fascia that has symmetrical tension, we have a pretty free feeling in our body. We kind of are spring-loaded again, and we feel like a spring chicken. So my introduction to fascia was I had developed plantar fasciitis on the left side of my foot, and my naturopath said, you don't have a foot issue, you have a fascia problem. And as I released the tension that had built up into my upper calf, the tension on my lower foot that was being pulled off of here. Most people don't realize plantar fascia is when the tension has become so tight that it starts to disconnect from this bone and there's often a little pocket here. It's very uncomfortable. And, if you go to an allopathic doctor, it's cortisone shots. Yeah. But instead, if we just release the tension that was being locked up here, this felt fine almost immediately. So within 2 weeks of releasing this, I had absolutely no pain anymore. So as I started looking at the body more like an engineer with this approach, I started to test people that in my life had knee pain. And I would palpate and I'd be like, what if we just got rid of all of the tension that was here and made this nice and open and flowing again? So I developed a sequence that basically combined the best of all of the fascia release techniques. There's a little bit of an argument. I like to say there's 24 types, including my own, but some people like to say there's at least 36 types. And they include some old stuff that, I don't really see as fascia release because it's not directly dealing with the tissues. And in the 24 techniques that exist, 22 of them, what they do is they're based on a Dr. Ida Rolf's original philosophy, which is find the tension within the body and palpate, manipulate, or move that tension so that it opens back up. And in all of those cases, they work because they're creating flow. However, because I'm an athlete and I still like to train a lot, I didn't like the idea that I would have bruising. I didn't like that it was painful.
That's her Rolf therapy, right?
Yeah, Dr. Ida Rolf invented Rolfing. She was the one that I think took massage therapy to the next level.
Yeah, because there's like myofascial release and then Rolfing is above that, right?
Yeah, so Rolfing is dealing with more of the deep tissue of the fascia. They usually have a bit of a sequence that they roll people through, and it's much more painful.
That's what I've heard. It's like you start at your toes, right? Like you go from your feet all the way up, and it's basically like, this is what I've heard. It's like separating your fascia from the muscles as much as you can, creating that separation to basically remove adhesions in the fascia. And I've heard people come away from like a full multi-session Rolf experience and they're like a completely different person. Like even sometimes personality changes. And it's so interesting because that just sort of lends credence to this idea that trauma and some of, our past issues are stored in our tissue to some degree, and maybe in our fascia, because fascia permeates all facets of our body and is like this network that goes everywhere. So
it's even deeper than Dr. Ida Rolf knew. So she was around like 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of her work has still been carrying on, but science has greatly improved. And so when she was here, she really thought fascia wrapped everything. But what we now know is that fascia actually goes over every single muscle fiber and then into the cells around the mitochondria. So fascia inserts through the cell through something called an integrin. And this is the reason why cold plunging works so well. People can increase their brown adipose tissue because the mitochondria within the cell have the ability to split, divide, and then multiply outside of itself. That's all happening through the fascia system.
Wow.
So Dr. Ida Rolf, she did a lot for bringing this work to fruition. And, Rolfing is just one of many that really treat the adhesion. So let's talk about an adhesion. It means that the fascia bands have adhered together. Mm-hmm. But what they're actually, it's not like it's grown together, right? What they're actually talking about is that the fluid, the hyaluronic acid that's supposed to be there, is stagnant. So if you look at it on an ultrasound, right? What you'll see in an adhesion, it's not like something has glued itself together. It's that the acid itself is trapped, locked, or not moving. There's no flow. So when we're Rolfing, when people are doing fascia blaster, when they're doing myofascial release, when there's 100 different things that they can do. But when we just look at it for what it is, it's a flow of fluid that needs to be moving around the fascia. And when we look at it like that, the adhesions become, and instead of the question that shifted for me, instead of asking, how do we remove the adhesions? It was, how do we just elicit flow? Because if we elicit flow, there's no more stagnation. So when somebody is palpating your tissues and they're doing, let's say they have your elbow in your butt cheek and they're going around in circles, they're not respecting the grain of the fascia. The fascia is a lot like our hair. We wouldn't brush our hair in circles without fear of ripping our hair apart. Mm-hmm. We would work from the bottom all the way to the top. And when we look at the fascia more like this spider web that has knots in it, we can just break up the knots and wait for the fascia to heal itself. And that's how a lot of these fascia release programs are built, is find the tension, destroy the tension, wait for the fascia to heal up. You might bruise, it might be uncomfortable, but it's better than stagnation. Mm-hmm. In my theory and in my sequence, we follow 8 rules that work with, there's this cell within the fascia called a fibrocyte. And it wasn't discovered until 2018 by a Dr. Carla Stecco. And to me, it's entirely hopeful because we've been told by the time you turn 30, your collagen production goes down, you're going to slowly dry out and experience, dullness within your body. And what she said is, no, our body has a cell, and this cell's job is to recreate hyaluronic acid. Now, hyaluronic acid is between every joint we have. It's a super dense version, and we call it synovial fluid. So when we use a sequence that follows these 8 rules, we got to be hydrated. You have to compress it for a certain period of time. We have to warm it up a certain way. We have to follow the grains of the fibers. There's certain parts of our body that we need to avoid. And then we dialogue with the tissues. So the way that I teach people is I bring them through a sequence and then you feel into your body. And as you're feeling into certain sections, we're dividing the feelings into 5 separate words. I call it electrical, radiating, dull, tender, or achy.
These are the 5 types of adhesions, right?
Yeah. And the real experience of doing this yourself, right? Because I'm the first, other than the human garage, Gary Lyman, mm-hmm. who is all about torque and compression, but he is a belly button centered up guy, not a foot guy. He's not working from the ground up. He has his own approach and he's getting great results with people.
Yours is more foot up approach though, right?
I'm all about the ground up because of the way that I look at the body as an engineer, because of my golf background, mm-hmm. and I having a ground-driven golf swing, because of my time at chiropractic, I really feel like our skeleton is floating in space. Mm-hmm. And what's holding all of our organs in space and all of our bones in space is the tension along these vertical major fascia bands.
It makes sense too if we have 26 bones in each foot, right?
Yes.
26 bones in each foot. So there's a lot going on in our feet. And I feel like our feet get neglected quite a bit.
Well, imagine, like, this is from my 5-foot skeleton, Sam. I stole it from him while we're gone. Imagine our balance and our ability to run and jump if our toes are like this.
Yeah. And that's what most shoes, ironically, a shoe that I'm wearing right now. Luckily, I wear Earth Runners most of the time. And I'm barefoot every time I do a workout now. But yeah.
Good. Yeah, the more dexterity that we have, for me, if somebody looks at their feet, if you can't move your pinky toe, you have lost dexterity.
Yeah.
And when the pinky toe becomes strapped to your other toes, when you start to walk, often we have a proclivity to start to walk on the outside of the foot. And this is going to create a lot of tension along that lateral band. I lovingly call it the fat guy walk.
Yeah.
Or the pregnant lady walk. It just happens when you have a big belly. So if you look at the bottom of your favorite athletic shoes, if there's a wear out mark on the outside foot, this is my advice. When we look at how the plantar fascia is made, it's a center line. When we stand, if we just close our eyes and we pretend like we're about to jump, just like jump 2 or 3 inches, our weight shifts to the inside line of our foot and then presses forward ever so slightly. That is the proper standing posture.
Oh, wow.
That's where we should be when we're waiting in line at the grocery store. And it's a pretty athletic move. You can feel your glutes engaged. You can feel your core slightly engaged. That is where we should be standing.
Interesting. So let's go back to the 5 types of adhesions. Let's talk about those a little bit more in depth, if we could.
So the electrical adhesions to me are the most severe.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen a crossover between neuropathy and the electrical adhesions. And the way that I like to describe them is that the fascia is a spider web, and this spider web is holding our organs and muscles in place, but it's also holding the entire nervous system. So as the nervous system is flowing, if we've had a pretty severe issue in a space, the fascia collapses. And I think this is the most overlooked part of fascia release, is when we look at like a vein in cadaver, a vein can fall completely flat. That's what makes it different than the arteries. And it's a compression. So the geometric shape within our veins allow it to flatten. The geometric shape within the fascia allow it to be almost like something, there's a geometric shape called an icosahedron. In it can, be 26-sided. I'm pretty sure it's 26-sided. And then you can collapse it all the way into a flat triangle. And to me, I see that similar shape within the geometry of the fascia. And as the fascia collapses, if it's collapsed all the way, when we hit that spot in our body, it's going to feel like lightning. And that lightning can be severe, it could be subtle. But in my opinion, that is where the fascia has collapsed over the nerve.
Okay.
And it's allowing the nerve to misfire. And often this is creating issues in people's feet. So people will be like, oh, I just have a little bit of neuropathy in that section. Neuropathy in the foot is a really big deal. I really, I have the privilege of working with, senior citizens down in South Florida. And there is no bigger deal to our balance and our walking ability as we age than our ability for our muscles in our foot to stay nourished and healthy. So people that think they can walk good, some of my 80-year-old clients, and they go to Europe and it's cobblestones and they have to use a walker and they hate it because they're in good health. Why do they have to be on a walker? But they don't have any toe dexterity left. Or their arches have collapsed because they haven't trained the muscles on the top of the foot. So I do a fascia flow, but in my membership, I teach a lot of toe exercises. And as people advance, there's always something else you can do to make it more complicated. So it's fun to get people's feet back online because it immediately translates to so much of our athletic ability. Wow.
Okay. And so that electric feeling of an adhesion, could you give an example of that like, is it like a shooting pain? Because I'm always thinking in terms of, I have 2 screws in my left shoulder. So yeah. I imagine that did a number on my fascia in my shoulder, which is interesting because I'm sure like you're familiar with the bands that go across from like left shoulder to right hip.
Yes.
I started getting right hip issues after my left shoulder, but I had also broken my ankle when I was in 8th grade on my right side. And like, I've always been an incredible jumper. I could dunk very easily growing up. And then now I can't jump off of 1 foot at all. I have to jump off of 2 feet in order to grab rim. But I'm just like thinking in terms of like what my left shoulder injury did across my fascial line and like translated down to my right foot and then back up. But after I had surgery and as I started training again, I would get like this subtle electric feeling in my shoulder that would shoot down my left arm. Is that what we're talking about here? Or is it different than that?
No, that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
It's when the nerve has been impinged by the fascia.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I've definitely experienced that then.
Yeah. The next one would be, so electrical can be varying. A lot of people experience it on the outside shin when I work with them because we work from the ground up. I'm not starting them on the shoulder often.
And it's in this context, it's like, you're working out the adhesion though. So this is a good thing that or it's just okay.
It's really an awareness exercise.
Okay, got
Most of us, we take care of our skin and our skin's not bleeding. So we're like, oh, we're good. We're healthy. But when we start to feel what's happening 1 inch, 2 inch, 4 inches underneath the skin, we notice that there's congestion, there's stagnation. It's often not symmetrical. And it's just like brushing our hair. Really, I mean, the toothbrush, I tried to create this metaphor a lot. The nylon toothbrush wasn't invented until 1938. And there was a propaganda campaign before World War II about we need to brush our teeth twice a day, every day. It's good for our brain health. It's good for our dental health. But that wasn't around not even 100 years ago. So I feel like I'm the lady walking around with a tennis ball going, you guys, we need to brush our fascia out. You know, joint pain is normal and natural if you allow your fascia to bound up and knot. But my goal is you don't need a therapist if you know how to deeply feel your body and work with what's within your body. And then we could just brush it out, just like we do our hair on a daily basis or our teeth on a daily basis.
Got it. Okay. I would recontextualize that joint pain is common, but it doesn't have to be natural or normal.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So after electric, what are the 4 other types?
The next one would be radiating. So if you hit a spot in your body and then you feel it elsewhere. So for instance, I had torn my right hamstring real good. And when I started taking care of this knot, I could feel it in my knee and I could feel it in my ankle start to release. So many people, they think we have muscle knots, but we don't. Our muscle is very binary. It's very held, but the fascia can have plenty of knots within it.
Okay. So even when you're getting massage, then it's not necessarily working out knots in the muscle, just like you're saying here. It's more knots in the fascia.
Yeah. And we really didn't know that until 2018. We really didn't have a concept of what was creating these weird emotional feelings, right? If somebody scares you, nothing can happen to your actual body and your full body, your face responds, your body responds. And that's because our fascia is that electrical component, moves faster than, it moves with our nervous system. So as we experience fear or stress, it will hold. But that radiating feeling is more so telling me that in the spider web of things, some people will get to a section of their body. And because often we're sitting in the same situations, I can almost call it, like if you're in your 30s, you probably have and you've been sitting like a normal person and driving, you probably have a cluster of adhesions at your upper calf, at your lower hamstring, and at the front of your quads. And usually the glutes are quite wrecked for most of us. And in these situations, when you start to palpate, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I have 30 different adhesions. And that's when I like to divide them. You don't have 30 serious ones. You have 5 real serious ones. And it's like if you imagine a spider web, if we were to bound up 5 big spots in there, those spots will create holes in the outside of the fascia. And that's what I look at as the tender, achy spots. So the tender, achy spots kind of move in and out of our existence depending on our training. And we're always going to have those. That's why it's a maintenance routine. It's not that we're always going to have them, but as we train dehydrated, as we go an afternoon on a serious linear hike, we're going to create those spots. But the electrical spots and the radiating spots and the dull spots are telling me that something within that fascia spider web has been locked up for an extended period of time. And those radiating spots are telling you that ball, that knot there, is pulling the joint out of sequence, pulling something else out of sequence.
Okay. That creates a chain effect in the body then too.
Yeah,
which is how it happened with me with my left shoulder surgery again, and that's how my right hip started getting out of balance. And I was training constantly post-surgery, and just like you mentioned rehab earlier, my rehab was awful. Just to give a little bit more context, I was in this program in the Army called the U.S. Army World Class Athlete Program, and I had surgery with a, quote, good surgeon. Knowing what I know now, I would have never, ever had surgery. I'm fully confident that my shoulder could have healed itself had I had the right tools, right? But nonetheless had surgery, and then my rehab, rather than with like an athletic trainer specific rehabilitation, situation, being that I was about to be training as an Olympic athlete, I had to do my rehab with just a traditional Army rehabilitation facility, which is focused on just getting dudes back on the front line to fight in combat rather than the mechanics of like, I was playing a throwing sport. So my rehab was awful. But when I came back to playing handball, instead of having that whipping motion that you need as a thrower, I lost all of that and had to really use my upper body torque to throw. So I think that in combination with just the 2 screws in my shoulder and all the tension there and like the just many adhesions and probably like complete severance of my fascia there, scar tissue, caused my right hip to have a lot of issues. So it created that sort of chain effect.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the world of allopathic, solutions. I think that's what we're trying to deconstruct is I don't even want to say like these things are bad or like the old fascia release methods are bad because they have so many more case studies than I have to prove anything. But it's the science keeps improving.
Yeah.
So like, why not look at and experiment with things that are a little gentler on the body and easier on the body?
So when someone, for example, like me, I tore sorry to keep going back to me. I'm just trying to like make it real for me here and make sense. And hopefully the audience can like pick up on this and apply it to their life. So when I tore my bicep tendon, rotator cuff, and labrum, I will say that I was experiencing a lot of emotional stuff at that point in my life. So I think that created a lot of tension on me as I trained athletically. And I can look back on several other injuries. I've had 4 surgeries in my life, and I was experiencing some significant trauma at those points in my life too, or just a lot of pressure when it came to my sport. So I wasn't in flow. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself, and not the good type of pressure that you brought up with golf, right? But with that, so do you think that when someone tears a muscle or tears a ligament or tears a tendon or something like that, that the true thing that's being torn there obviously is the muscle, the ligament or tendon itself, but it's also creating a separation in the fascia too? Or like, how do you look at injury in general now?
Wow. Great question.
Yeah.
I look at a lot of injury as could have been prevented.
Yeah.
And if you think about like kids and their ability to fall and not get injured, and they can look like they've really, twisted their leg backwards and they just get up and they kind of laugh it off. That power is still within us if we are able to keep this hyaluronic acid moving.
Okay.
Now, there's this thing about the fascia. I didn't really touch upon it, but there's a fluid inside of the fascia. And that's what's being argued about across countries right now.
Is that what people call the interstitial fluid?
Yes.
Okay.
They call it a lot of different things based on the research that you're reading. And the Chinese are saying that this is life force, this is chi force. The Germans are saying this is just lymphatic tissue.
Germans are very matter of fact. This is just lymphatic tissue.
And then there's some people like Dr. Catherine Clinton who believes that this is like the interstitial fluid that's holding an electrical charge. It's the quantum. It is the ether embodied. It is bioluminescent. The fluid inside of the fascia is viscoelastic, piezoelectric. It is polyphasic. And
what does that mean?
Meaning it can change from solid to liquid. So the fascia itself, when it's healthy, it looks like honey. It looks like honey trapped in a spider web. And when it's not healthy, it looks gangly. It looks like a dreadlock. It looks like, if I didn't brush my hair for 5 days. And the fluid, if you think of it like tubes, right? The fluid gets stagnant and coagulated in those areas. The interesting thing about the fluid inside of the fascia, and even in hyaluronic acid itself. So hyaluronic acid is one acid molecule, right? That's in a very particular shape, and it's housing 1,600 water molecules. And so when you slap hyaluronic acid, and a lot of stuff that's made synthetically is made out of umbilical cord or shark or turkey neck, but our body makes it. But if you were to take like a vat of synthetic hyaluronic acid and you slapped it, it would respond like one giant unit. It has a lot of surface tension.
Like fourth phase water, essentially.
Yeah. So the fluid inside of the fascia itself is being completely argued about. And like while medical science argues about it, I just want to get it working in my system. So about it was 9 months after I started taking care of my own fascia, and I had a lot of chronic stuff going on at that point. My hip was really bothering me. It was always clicking. I had definitely had arthritic symptoms. The doctors just want a cortisone shot. We'll replace it when you're 40. It'll be fine. And I wanted a different solution. So as I started training my fascia, my hip click stopped.
Wow.
My whole life I've had a hip click since I've started walking. And only 2 weeks of doing this did it stop. And then the inflammation stopped. And what I'm noticing is that as long as the fascia fluid is moving, we can be spring loaded. So 9 months after training, I started gymnastics at 34 years old. I never thought I was going to be able to have, my wrists work again in that way or be able to fall into a split. And I'm spring loaded. I kind of feel like a little spring chicken.
Wow, that's incredible. Okay, I keep on jumping around just because my mind's going off in 100 different places, and my audience is used to that, thank God. So sorry, everyone, bear with me. So we're talking about the 5 different types of adhesions, and just to be clear, is this like as you're massaging out the fascia, as you're doing these release techniques, that you'll feel this like electric versus dull versus the other? What was the third one that we hit?
Electric. Radiating and dull. Those are the most 3 serious feelings that can develop within the body.
When you say feelings, is that like day-to-day feelings, or is that as someone is massaging out the adhesions?
Well, ideally you massage yourself.
Okay, well, I'm just saying, like, it's not me walking around, I feel the radiating, I feel the electric.
Well, you could.
Okay,
I mean,
you could.
some people that have scar tissue and surgery.
These are just general symptoms of adhesions, right?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And probably more deeply expressed or more pertinent or more obvious when you're getting adhesions massaged out, you experience these types of electric dullness radiating. Okay.
And the beautiful part of doing it yourself is you're not relying on a massage therapist to feel it. Mm-hmm. So instead of just working on the tiny little spots, you're working on the big guys. Mm-hmm. Really, it takes like 6 to 9 months to just get through the first layer.
Got it.
So the superficial front line, the superficial back line, and the lateral band are the outside vertical fascia bands.
Got it.
And, we palpate them, but until they soften, you can't really feel what's underneath. And that's why, the Rolfing, those sessions where people, you do hardcore for a week, I'm always questioning like, wow, when you take a longer term approach and you take a gentler approach, you can get way deeper in the body.
Wow.
So the goal for me is, down to the bone, there's nothing impinged.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So let's go over the last 2 of the 5 types of adhesions, and then I'll move on with other questions.
The dull spots are weird. Mm-hmm. I remember I was teaching this fascia flow event, and I have a musician playing, and I'll do a little 30-minute science lecture, and then we go 2 hours deep dive into the body. And I was telling people, your brain ignores pain. It has built so many neural networks to keep you out of pain. So your job during the warm-up of each section is to touch every square centimeter of that section. And I was telling people this repetitively. I was like, please, try to touch every square centimeter, because you don't feel until we activate this piezoelectric charge. If some place has gone dull in your nervous system, you won't feel it unless we create that pressure. Piezoelectric is for the body in this case, is when we are palpating, the fascia is sending an electrical charge back to the brain that says, oh, we're pushing here. I feel pressure. So when we do the warm up in a certain section, when you have a dull spot, it'll almost feel numb and it will feel clogged. And I remember I was teaching this event and I was telling people, don't skip a spot. Make sure you touch every square centimeter. And I hit a spot in my hip that I had never touched before. And here I was telling people, don't skip it. And it's funny what your brain can do to hide soreness and tenderness from you, because it doesn't want you to be in pain. Mm-hmm. So often the core of my cueing when we get into the sequence, and the sequence is relatively simple when people get the hang of it, is make your brain feel. Because when you allow yourself to experience, okay, so you've warmed up this section, now you're going to identify the most intense area of that section. Now you're going to hang out with that feeling. And the job for me is to just get them to breathe slow and to witness. Because if you can witness, your body will take it takes a period of time. You got to sit there with it. It changes. The feelings change. But sitting with the feelings is very uncomfortable for most people. To just sit in silence and stillness with the awareness of their body and the awareness of the attention building. But as we give the rules, each one of the rules, as long as we honor all of them, you can actually feel your body go into the alchemical process of turning that solid part of your fascia back into liquid.
Wow. So it's just about bringing awareness to that spot.
It's better done by us than any massage therapist because only you know if that spot felt electrical or if that other spot felt radiating. Because a massage therapist could give you a great, amazing massage and never hold a single compression point long enough, never warm it up correctly. They might go in circles, and that's going to work against the grain of the fascia. So to me, it's removing, for the first time in 125 years, other than Human Garage, he did it too, the layer of therapist, making it accessible to the guys who are on, eco tours in Bali that are incredible athletes that are living without Wi-Fi and they need to take care of their body. That's who I'm excited to give to, is the people that are, they're touring and they're too busy, but they've been sitting in a car for 8 hours and they need to make sure that their feet are alive and awake.
And all these like different flows that you have, those are all available on like the link in the show notes, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
In the fascia flow course, it doesn't take long. Like once you learn the sequence, it's a 20-minute, 5 days a week. And you do that for 6 months and you get once we get all of those old knots out, it's just a minimal practice. I only train maybe now 2-3 days a week and I still work out really hard. So it's only the initial part that takes a while to kind of make up for all of that time.
Got it. So that's more of like a reset to come back to just homeostasis, essentially.
Yeah.
Got it.
And it really doesn't matter your age. Like I work with one of my teachers right now was a World Cup soccer player, and her fascia is, she's young and she's fit and her fascia is wrecked compared to the 60-year-old PhD, who's been very gentle on her body through that time.
Okay. So the last two types of adhesions.
Tender and achy. And that's when we create pressure within our body and there's an achiness. I actually have a tool here. It's called a fascia stick. And, in the work that I teach, you only need a tennis ball and a big book. But Fascia Sticks is a great company. And Michael Jordan actually used to release his fascia between his fingers before a sport. So it's all about just being able to feel between things. So if you look at the phalanges of the fingers, the phalanges of the feet, have you ever brushed out the fascia in between those? And when we start asking ourselves those questions, we start realizing that the body is more than just skin with, liquids inside of it. It's actually like hair moving a fluid. And if we can assist that fluid of flowing, our body stays spring-loaded. It feels free. And kids, when they fall, they can kind of turn to jello on the inside. That's the amazing thing about the fascia. That's the misunderstood point, is it responds to whatever's going on.
What's so strange is, like, I've heard people describe it as this like liquid crystalline matrix, and then other people describe it as this like mesh network that is all stronger than steel per like square inch or something like that. Is it both of those?
It is, and it changes.
Okay.
And they don't really know what's changing it. There is a guy, he's not a doctor, Coach Chong Zi.
Okay.
And he's doing EMG studies on the fascia connection. And it's blowing what we know as fast twitch muscle training out of the water. And he's been working high-ticket clients with elite athletes. And his results are pretty awesome. I've been following his work for a while. And he is all about how do we optimize this electricity, because the electrical component of the fascia is what's creating the shift from this solid to liquid form.
Yeah.
But as an athlete, if you can create a control switch over those two, you've just unlocked like the next level. So
it's not about fast twitch muscle fibers in this case. It's not about working that. It's about working being able to switch from one or the other in terms of like the very stable, strong to the liquid flowy form of fascia, and sort of move between the two essentially.
Yeah. And it makes you think of Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
Be like water. Where was he getting all that power for the 1-inch punch?
Yeah.
When you look at the breath control, and that's to me is what's missing in Coach Chong Zi's studying, because when you bond breath control, right, your breath changes your heart rate, Your heart rate changes your brainwaves change your fascia tension. So as I look at like Olympic athletes in the greatest of all time, how they would prep for an intense adrenaline, they're walking into championships. And you know that they are experiencing heavy duty adrenaline dumps. They might have pressure on them and expectation. So when we experience adrenaline, it's like nitric oxide for our breath, our heart, our brain, and our fascia. So how are we controlling what's happening between those? And as a golfer, I was really intimate with the idea that I could like all of a sudden with adrenaline hit the ball 300 yards. And a lot of, elite golfers talk about what happens when you're under pressure. All of a sudden the adrenaline dumps and you have to club down because you'll just start flying greens because everything is so souped up in the body. But then you get up to the green, you have to make a 2-foot putt and you have still all this juice in you. So learning to me how to toggle switch through this experimental conversation around fascia, I think it's going to blow the water on everything sports science.
Well, this brings up a good point too, because there's this guy that is 7'5", 7'6" in the NBA. His name's Victor Wembanyama from France, and he's I think like 19 or 20 years old. He's massive, and he looks super wiry and skinny. But his athletic trainer, I think, was quoted as saying, "No, he's actually really strong because of his fascia." There was another video that I was watching of, I think it was one of those videos where like either a kid was run over or a kid was stuck underneath a car, and then like the mom suddenly had the strength to lift up the car. And someone was trying to say, like the narrator of this video, that the reason the mom was able to do this had nothing to do with her muscular strength. It was that she was able to tap into the strength of her fascia to be able to pull that car up. And that just like makes me think differently about these, athletes that I would compete against that didn't look in terms of their, musculature, like very strong, but would be very, very strong, whether that was in basketball or football or, handball when I was playing that. And it makes me think differently about them. Maybe that what had nothing to do, and maybe strength never really had anything to do with muscles. It was more about the fascia. So kind of like throwing that at you now to explain, when it comes to strength, when it comes to explosiveness, when it comes to quickness, when it comes to even endurance, is that more a function of fascia than it is muscles? And then what role do muscles play with now us coming to understand the importance of fascia?
Great question. Let's put our engineer hat on real quick and think about this. The fascia is sending nerve flow and circulation to all of your muscles, right? So if your muscles are bound up and tense, how much nerve flow and nutrients and rest are they going to receive? Versus if they have full flow, they have circulation, they can touch all of the blood all of the time. The nerve function is 100%. And their circulation around it is perfect. So just think of recovery time alone, just how we recover from the same exact training. Then let's take two athletes and pretend that one's done fascia training, right? So they have no tension that's built up from the bottom, and they have full toe dexterity. What's their, even if they're training the same exact way, the guy that has full toe dexterity and released fascia compared to somebody who has crushed toe dexterity and super tense here, that guy's going to have a giant proclivity for injury compared to this one. And the interesting thing is you can really see that in soccer, the guys that get injured versus the guys that don't. The guys that can fall and they get back up and they're fine. The guys that fall, and then they have to be wheeled off the field. There's a gentleman, I've been studying, exercise science for a long time. And because I was a D1 golfer, I had an opportunity to be coached by a lot of different people from high school through college. And then now I have coaches that I love. I love coaching. I feel like coaches make people better. And if people feel stagnant in their practice, go get yourself a coach for 3 months. They'll take you to another level. It's really nice to have that cheerleader. But in fascia training, if we had two athletes, one does fascia flow, one doesn't. Right? One works on their fascia, one works on their toe dexterity, they work on their breath rhythm, and one does not. They do the same exact training. The person that doesn't do it is going to end up ripping, tearing, or shearing their fascia at some point, but then things are going to be slightly bound a little bit more, which is why there's 25-year-olds that have been training professionally that are, playing on the MLB or they're a professional dancer and they rip their ACL. Why does that happen? Is it because they did something wrong? Because that happens. You make a bad fall and you're going to break it no matter what. But if the soft tissue can be honey-like everywhere, what's going to keep you from feeling spring-loaded? What changed, really, from when we were 10 and completely unstoppable with no fear of pain to when we're 30? And to me, that's all fascia. So there's a couple things that happen when we start to change the conversation from muscles to fascia. So there's 651 muscles. There's 9 fascia bands. So when I'm with clients and let's say I only have 1 hour with them, and I'm teaching them how to do a hollow body hold in order to train their, frontline fascia band. If I'm going to use muscles, I have to talk about 36 muscles for them to activate. If I talk about fascia, I have to say one thing for them to activate it all. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. So like what you're saying is if you just focus on activating the fascia, that fascial line, I presume, goes through those same 36 muscles.
Yeah.
So it naturally activates those 36 muscles.
So if we think of like
but how do you activate, like, I don't know. I'm trying to think mentally, like are you talking about like a hollow hold like this, right? Literally like where you're laying?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do I focus on, because I was doing hollow holds literally this morning, how do I focus on activating my fascia there?
Okay. So that would be pointing your toes, having the shins tight, having the quads tight, having the core tight, having the intercostals tight or expanded, having the shoulders open, having the arms tight, and then having your neck in position.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So if you did a handstand, you're freezing and activating superficial front line, superficial back line, and the lateral bands if you're going to be able to hold for 10 seconds.
Okay.
So it kind of simplifies the way that we're looking. Exercise science has been working on stagnant, isolated muscle groups.
Isometric, yeah. I was just thinking that.
And we're omnidirectional. We like our lateral bands for most athletes that I work with are so tight. The hip joint itself is completely knotted up and gnarly and dirty in there because we're stair climbers, lunges, running. We're going and we could work out in one single hallway.
Yeah.
Me and Bill Mieta just had a really funny conversation about training asymmetrically. Like the maces that you have where there's, weight only on one side.
Functional patterns.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll have to dig into that a little bit more because I have a lot of people I've purchased functional patterns and I haven't done it yet. So I can't claim whether or not it's good, but yeah, I want to dig into that a little bit more.
Okay. I'm going to wait for your prodding questions.
It's all good. Okay. I want to start okay, let me ask you this because I wouldn't know. Do you feel complete on discussing the fascia?
Yeah.
Okay. How then have you made a unique connection between the fascia and the breath coming from breath work?
Okay. So that's a 4-part equation.
Okay.
So when we look at the body like an engineer, right? So we're abandoning medical science. We're just going to look at the body like a magnetic combustion engine.
She keeps pointing to me because I was an engineer. I majored in engineering. I've never used it, but
you kind of are. You kind of are. There's a lot of processes.
I love that you're doing that like an engineer. I'm like, I've majored in it, but I've never done it in my life. But yes, I think in like terms of processes and optimization.
Yeah.
So, but
perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pretend we had a skeleton.
Let's pretend I'm an engineer. Okay,
yes.
Go ahead.
And this skeleton needs to be held up by something, right? Most skeletons that we see are actually a little wrong because they tilt the pelvis back and they shove a stick up its butt. And it's not actually accurate. Our hips are like built differently. We have a hole at the bottom of our body. So when we look like an engineer at this moving kinetic body chain that we have, the bones are there. That's the structure. And if we want like a good structure, we're going to want balance and tension on both sides. So let's build a collagen scaffolding structure that runs from the feet to the head, and that's going to hold all the bones in place. Then we're going to insert the electrical wiring inside of the body, and that's going to start from the base of the brain, the brainstem, And then all those wires are going to flow through the scaffolding system to touch every single cell. So every cell has nerve function, right? Then the brain is like the flower. That's the CPU control unit of all processes. Now, when we're born, sperm and egg come together. At that juncture point, the brainstem is formed. And then our nerves start to branch out. Those touch stem cells. And then our organs are formed. Then the bones are formed on top of that, right? So at the very beginning of life, at that brainstem, our brainstem is divided into 3 sections: midbrains, pons, and medulla oblongata. The bottom medulla oblongata is like famous, but nobody really knows where it is. That controls our breath rate and our heart rate, along with some other stuff, our facial expressions and such. So our breath and our heart are connected together. And as we breathe, our heart responds. So if I start hyperventilating and start to breathe at 40 breaths, 50 breaths a minute, in about 2 minutes, my heart will send a message to the brain. I could just be sitting here that says, hey, we're preparing for battle. So there's a sequence between the heart and the breath. The breath controls the heart, right? Now the heart communicates to the brain, and the brain is controlling all of these other circulation patterns within our body, including the fascia. So if I sit here and I start to hyperventilate for 2 minutes, the heart rate will elevate. The brain waves will begin to elevate because now I'm on edge. I don't know what we're about to do. And the fascia tension will start to increase. So as I pull the body into the sympathetic stress state, all of these systems are going to start changing inside, right? So as we have an elevated breath rate pattern, the digestion turns off, blood starts to move to the muscles, which our immune system turns off. Everything's kind of preparing. Now, if I were to take my breath rate and slow it down into 4 breaths a minute, and I stayed there for 4 minutes, right? It's much easier to pull our body into a state of stress than a state of pleasure. So if I start to maintain 4 breaths a minute, which is 7-second inhale, 8-second exhale, my heart rate slows. That communicates to my brain something else entirely. And then the body starts to deeply relax. So what I found teaching breathwork is that I would have business owners come in, my very driven, ambitious business owners. They're making out time to do breath work, so they're proud of themselves. And they would come in and I would move them through the breath sequence without touching their fascia, without having them do anything to their fascia. And their body tension from 20 years of push, push, push was locked in. So I would take their breath rate and we would slow down the heart and it would change the brain, but the fascia was still locked. So what I found is if I trained people's fascia and made that flow, the brain waves would alter quicker. It made the breath more powerful.
So you do the fascia first and then the breath?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And people that train with me consistently, they'll keep up the breath 5 days a week and they'll start doing fascia 3 days a week. And, you know, the breath routine that I teach is awesome. It's like a really great way to start your day. It moves out all of the fluids around in your brain, cleans out your nasal glands, gets you ready for a good day of breathing, cleans out the lungs. But with the fascia, we just want it to be moving all the time. And what I want to expose people to is that your body is an instrument. And the fascia can really be looked at as strings. And these major strings, these major 9 strings are meant to be holding lovely, comfortable, balanced tension. And our breath is almost like the strumming. So if we use my ukulele here as an example, the breath would be the playing of it. And the tension, like that sound of it being beautiful or ugly, is based on the tension only coming from one side. So my issue with chiropractic was that we were only adjusting the tension from the neck down. We weren't looking at the feet. And as anybody that sees a chiropractor knows, you have to go in for adjustments and you have to go and get it checked. And I always thought like, well, what if we could just tweak the tuning of the tension at our feet? Because when you tune an instrument, you're only tuning one side. You're never tuning both. If the bridge is unstable, you're not going to have a chance of holding the tension that you want. So when we look at the body like an instrument, things start to change because now the breath is the rhythm setter for everything else in our brain and in our body. And anybody that does creative thinking We know that when we step into that shower or we put our head on the pillow, all of a sudden, like, where's my journal? I need to write down that idea. And it's because we've allowed things to relax. So I would like to teach people how to, when you're running a business meeting, if we really got this, if we really understood that our brain is significantly more capable of imagination and significantly more capable of new creative thought. Not the same stuff that we've been taught, not the same stuff that we've done forever. That all comes from theta. And theta brainwaves are where our children are. They're 2 to 7 years old. And theta is when our neurons that are capable of 10,000 to 75,000 different connections can cross-hybridize. And this is why a kid, when you say, what do you want to drive to work when you're older? And they're like, I want to drive a dragon that's an alligator that can go underwater, that could be outside, and it has wings, but the wings are like butterflies. I mean, that's somebody in theta.
You're right.
So when we start to look at the body like this instrument, instead of this like, okay, I'm going to meditate and I'm going to bring my brain to this place, we are aware of our tension. We're aware of this magnetism that we carry. We're aware of how our energy is bumping up against others. And I think all of us have had that moment of flow. Maybe you're in a new town, maybe you're getting ready for your biggest concert ever, and you're just feeling good. You're feeling like present, and your body feels alive, and you're charged up. You're excited about what you're supposed to do. That should be our constant state. And to me, that constant state isn't just a pocket of time. It's realizing that there's a rhythm. Just like any good song, there's a melody that we are meant to sing, and it's between our breath and our heart rate and our brainwaves and our fascia. And when we can find that flow, for me, it's 4 breaths a minute. If I can keep myself around 4 breaths a minute, 3 breaths a minute, I'm kind of in control. I have enough space between my brainwaves to think constructively, to maybe make a joke instead of being triggered by something, to maybe laugh off something else, or create levity in the same conversation that would have otherwise been stressful in the past. And that's a funny thing about brainwaves, Alec, is people think that we have the ability to be 100% present, but we don't. The nervous system, it's operating at 268 miles an hour. But in this, there's an oscillation. And the oscillation is internal to external. So 8 times, it divides down to 8 times a second. So even though you and I are here, we're fully in it, I only have your attention for 8 times a second. Because in that other moments of time, your body is calibrating to how is the lighting? Do I need to go to the bathroom? Am I hungry? Am I comfortable? Can I relax deeper? So we only get to share these inside and outside moments of internal and external. And it's through these orifices of perception. Our eyes are always taking things in, and our ears and our mouth and our skin. So people don't realize, but we are constantly fluctuating. And it's in these fluctuations of our consciousness, literally, of the inside and outside, if we can become more fully aware of the body that we are in, we feel more at peace. It's in these dull spots and in these rating spots and the electrical spots that our brain has to try to make us not feel, that we start to dull our consciousness. But if we can release that freedom, we can make our breath mighty. We have an opportunity to use our brain at a completely different level. And that's what we're falling short on. Our brain has the capacity for 100 hertz. So for people who don't know, the brain is made up of 2 cells, the neurons and the glial cells. Now, the glial cells are interesting. If you look at enough literature in neuroscience, some will say like, oh, they nourish the neurons. And then other people will be like, we actually don't really know. It's a kind of a big mystery box within the brain. And then the neurons themselves, we have billions of them, and they each have the ability to connect 10,000 to 75,000 different times. That's why we have to learn things a couple times before it anchors. It has to find where it fits. And when we are thinking, when we're talking like we are now, we're in beta brainwaves, which is 16 to 30 hertz. I skipped over a part.
Sorry.
When these neurons are creating the connections, right? The things that we do repetitively become anchored in. almost like a highway. So your route here when you were driving, were you really thinking about your directions?
No.
You just autopilot,
Yeah.
listen to the tunes, something else going on. And our brain develops these highways of repetitive action. So as we age, things become rather unconscious because we can just brush our teeth and do 100 other things. We're not really feeling brushing our teeth. And that's okay. We're multifunctional, multidimensional beings. That's fine.
It is amazing how we have the capability to fully split our awareness. Even like when you're reading a book and your mind is fully elsewhere, you are even sometimes verbally saying the words, but your mind is somewhere else. Like it's really cool that we have the capability to do that, but also really can be very destructive. And it just shows that if we were able to harness all of that awareness and put it into one thing, how powerful we could be as human beings.
To me, that's what I'm all about. The symphony of the mind is an untapped ability that we have. And that's between 31 to 100 hertz. So they measure the brain just like a sound wave. You know, those little electrodes, I'm sorry, they're not electrodes. They're microphones that make up an electroencephalogram. And it's reading the thunderstorm of activity between the neurons. And the monks have been shown that they can operate in gamma. They can operate to this 31 to 100 hertz. And the rest of us are completely tapping out at 30.
Wow.
Barely ever crossing over. When we do cross over, it's for a half second to 1 second. And it's often a couple times a year. And I want to live there because that's when our brain is operating in a symphony-like space. And it's when we can see things that other people don't. And to me, the way that the monks are doing it, there's no glitching, there's no tightening of the body like some people are going through hyperventilation practices in order to pop into gamma. I'm not saying that doesn't work, but when we look at the monks that are living there, there's no tension in the body. It's an ease. So I believe that the way that I'm going to build that bridge is by learning how to resonate the breath, heart, and brain with an open radio tower of fascia. I see the fascia as the radio tower.
Wow.
So if we picture like a cell phone tower, right? The cell phone tower is holding up this magnet at the top that's perceiving information just like our brain is, just like our eyes, nose, ears, everything is on top for us. All the information's coming through this way for the most of us. Now, if we're able to create full nerve flow through the fascia to the ground, right? The fascia fluid itself, the hyaluronic acid itself, is holding an electrical charge. So that hyaluronic acid, it's holding an arrangement of water. And this water is charged. And it's electrostatic, meaning that it's moving in a repulsion network. So if you can explore this concept with me, most people, when they feel the fascia adhesions, they're feeling a physical impingement. They're like, oh, that's a knot. Let's release the knot. If you can open your mind up, we're dealing with a fluid that has an electrical charge. And this electrical charge is a repulsion charge. So all of the water is being scooted through these nanotubules and around these nanotubules with negative magnetic resistance. So just like two magnets that don't have a good charge, they're going to push away each other. That's how the flow is moving through our body. And to me, when we open up the fascia all the way to the feet and we start to charge the breath in a slow, powerful, mighty sequence, and we start to experience how our awareness oscillates, we can expand. We are meant to live partially outside of our body.
Yeah.
And they've been proving it. I mean, 30% of people have something called a super aware nervous system or super sensitive nervous system. And it just means that 30% of people, if we blindfolded them and strapped them to this chair, they could tell us, okay, there's a hand over here by my shoulder. There's something over here. There's light behind me, even though they're not seeing it. And you're aware of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes sense too if you know that, first off, we can only perceive 0.0035% of the available electromagnetic spectrum. And that's just what we know, what science claims to know. But then in addition to that, we have the human biofield, which is a fundamental component of who we are, right? So it's just being able to tap into this extension of ourselves. So this might be a question that maybe, I don't know, I'll just ask it. Have you thought about the interplay between the human biofield? I'm going to throw a lot at you here. The human biofield, the what do you call it again?
Hyaluronic acid.
Hyaluronic acid, cerebral spinal fluid, and fourth phase water.
All right, you ready for this?
Yeah, let's go.
Back to the body as an instrument. I really see there's this thing called harmonics that happen on every stringed instrument at the halfway point. And let's see if I can, oh, here it is. So at the halfway point, the frequency wave on either side of the string are perfectly balanced. So if I just place my hand ever so slightly, you can hear that both sides of the string are basically making a noise. You can only hear this side because it's attached to the drum of the ukulele body. And this happens at the halfway, the quarter way, and the third way. I think that the body's the same. I think that we have a resonant rhythm that can take us to gamma. So yeah, the body's like a battery. We need sunshine. We need to touch the earth or at least be on a conductive surface for 20 minutes a day in order to, downgrade our magnetics and upgrade the new fresh electrons for the day. So our biofield, super essential, How do I feel like it's stuck together? I feel like it's stuck together in a rhythm. And the rhythm is just like an instrument. And each of our instruments are tuned to the warrior that we are. Some people are so peaceful and they carry almost a monk-like energy and stillness like Chris does. For me, he's the ocean embodied, in my opinion, like slow wavelengths all the time. And then other people are a little more tight, a little more wound up. And that resonance comes through in how they talk, how they walk, how they pick up their stuff from a room. And when we start seeing our bodies like this musical instrument, it kind of changes our relationship to our pace, to our cadence. I meet with a lot of fantastic business owner women, and what a privilege to be able to work with so many powerful women around the world. And many of them come to me with the same exact issue they have been charging their day for 20 years. And they're doing all of the right things. But when they wake up and they go into the office, they're in this state of tension. And I've been building them their own sequences to help them learn how to come into work and to maintain that state of peace. Some of them are chanting for a half an hour on their drive into work so that they're super slow breathing and they've vibrated all of their parasympathetic nervous system. And then they play nature sounds on the background during their office meetings. Some of them need to go and take a walk at lunchtime, and a very slow walk where they're focused on their breath. And it's as we start to take care of the fascia and take care of our breath, what we find is our awareness of everything else starts to increase. So I do something called archetype work, and Archetypes has been around since the dawn of philosophy, and it allows us to build a vocabulary around the things that bring us enthusiasm. And many of us are feeling maybe a little out of sync with life because we're not honoring the gifts that we're truly here to bring. And when we can read through a glossary and identify this is who I am, and then we build a little roadmap of this is how who I am fits into my energetic signature. We bond archetypes with the astrological wheel, which is what Carolyn Myss did in this last century with the archetypes. Every 100 years, there's somebody that picks it up. And when we think of the biofield and we think of how we're regulating these patterns, it's happening all of the time. It's not just that 20 minutes a day that we separate out to work on our fascia. It's the rhythm in which we breathe when we speak.
Yeah.
It's the rhythm in which we walk to our loved ones. It's the rhythm in which we, take our shower and walk to our car. Tension can build or tension can be released at any moment based on how we are handling it. And the concept of music, I think, allows people to relax into that emotional mechanism of, wow, when I am soft, when I am at peace, it's easier for me to bring laughter and love and merriment to any given moment, regardless of the tension, regardless of the stress.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm in my mind always trying to fit together a framework of how fourth phase water interacts with the biofield, and then bringing in cerebral spinal fluid, because I wonder if for example, cerebral spinal fluid as it relates to gamma brainwaves, which you said monks are basically living there, if they're able to like fully tap in to that continual flow of CSF up and down the spinal column, and maybe if this may sound crazy, but if that CSF is sort of bleeding out into the fascial system, into the rest of the body to make them sort of live in that state. I just wonder if there's some connection between CSF and gamma brain waves.
Oh, for sure. So the CSF is all trapped within the spine, right? But it's regulated by our breath.
Mm-hmm.
So as we inhale, it rises. And as we exhale around the thoracic spine, it pushes down. So if we have a shallow breath, our CSF doesn't quite touch absolutely everything. And we make about a half liter of new CSF fluid a day. And as it moves up and down, we want it to touch every part of our brain. And it's interesting. I just went to a biohacking conference with Dr. Jalal, and he's a dentist, and he believes that some of the standard orthodontics approaches, even though it's created perfect structure within our mouth, has actually locked up some of the skull plates. He has some very interesting case studies around using some release mechanisms around the sphenoid bone. His partner does it. And it all goes back to if we just look like an engineer at what's moving the CSF fluid and what the CSF fluid needs to do, like what it needs to pump. It needs a good, strong breath that's consistent when we're awake and sleep. And it needs movement in the skull plates. So if somebody's had, intense orthodontic surgery and like a lot of collapse mechanisms here, they might have tension that has locked up their skull plates. So for me, it's all movement. It's all flow. If we have optimal flow within our systems with a big, mighty breath, everything should have what it needs. That being said, some people do have some, serious issues that have been locked up since they were a kid and they had braces when they were still developing and things have kind of seized for them. Sometimes that can even happen with people that have very intense lateral band tension. The lateral band connects up here towards the skull, and when it's really tight, it can actually pull down on the jaw. So some people that have intense TMJ or grind their teeth, to me, it's if you're pulling hard on one side and the other side needs to be there, it needs to pull hard too. So it's just tension and balance between the system. But the CSF fluid is moving with the breath. Mm-hmm. Monks are heavily trained on how to breathe.
Yeah.
They breathe perfectly. They breathe in a shape. They breathe really slow, and they do lots of chanting. To me, I think that chanting is like the untapped mechanism, because as we are making sound, we are restructuring the water of our body.
Yeah.
And when we're chanting, we're also creating a ton of vibration movement within the skull. So one of my favorite things to teach people is humming, and then humming with your mouth closed, and then humming with your mouth closed, and you move your tongue into different positions, and then you start changing the pitch. You can actually steer the feeling of vibration through your head. Wow. In order to open and unlock certain things. So tongue position, chanting, humming, all of these things, deep breathing. When you're humming, you're naturally extending your exhale. You're naturally taking in bigger breaths. They all play a part. And if you think about monks, in a resonant chamber, chanting for 2 hours together, where there's an unceasing sound. Like when we play a crystal bowl, the crystal bowls are making sine waves. So they're unceasing and you can just hear the oscillation. That's what you get when you're with, 200 people chanting, is there's almost a different, if you're in a resonant chamber, there's a different oscillation of these waves that allow people to tune in together. Mm-hmm. And it's when we experience these brain waves, when they resonate between each other, that's when things can really sync for people.
Sheilajit is one of the world's most popular superfoods. It's loaded with over 40 trace minerals, fulvic and humid acids, antioxidants, and more. It's a resin or tar-like substance that seeps out of the rocks of the Himalayas at extremely high altitudes, formed from centuries worth of decomposing plant matter and microbial activity, distilled by pure rainwater and pressurized by tons of mountainous rock. In a way, you could say it's kind of like the lifeblood of the earth itself, and we can use it to enhance our daily lives by absorbing its power into our body cells. However, if you've tried Sheilajit in the past, you know it's true when I say it does not taste good, and that almost seems like an understatement. Some people say it's like licking an old used ashtray, and some people get a little more descriptive than that. Let your imagination run wild. It's pretty bad. But one thing is for certain. I've tried tons of sheilajit products, and no one has ever been able to cover the flavor, let alone make it taste good, until now. My friends at Organifi just released these new sheilajit gummies, and they actually taste good. They deliver 250 milligrams per serving of pure Himalayan sheilajit. Sheilajit's benefits include supporting energy production, healthy hormone levels, performance and recovery, promoting collagen synthesis and heart health, increasing cellular energy, and decreasing fatigue. Sheilajit has become super trendy in the superfoods and holistic health world for obvious reasons, and people have long been desperate for a solution to the flavor problem. That's why in the few months since Organifi released these, they've already sold out several times. Visit Organifi.com/TWF. That's ORGANIFI.com/TWF, or just head to the show notes. Take a look at their whole collection, and when you go to check out, use promo code TWF. That code is going to give you a 20% discount on all of their products, and they have a lot of amazing products other than their sheilajit gummies. Find out how these superfoods can help you on your health journey today with Organifi. Just because my wheels are kind of obsessively spinning right now, this is just what I do, creating like a framework in my mind of how all these things sort of work together between the biofield, cerebrospinal fluid, the fascial system, all of it. So you said the fascial system is kind of like an antenna of the body, right? So maybe the biofield could be seen as sort of an amalgamation of the waters of our body, because you said that the fascial endpoints ultimately end up in each of our cells in the mitochondria, right? Mm-hmm. So if our cells are comprised of fourth phase water, then it's like the imprint of who we are is stored in each of our cells that is then traveling through the fascia, which is the antenna that is then emanated outward in the extension of us that is the biofield. So it's almost like the biofield is the extension of the fascial system. You think that might be a little bit accurate?
No,
maybe?
To be honest, I've had crazy moments thinking of the fascia. Like we went to the inner space cave that was just here.
Yeah.
And everything looked like fascia.
Yeah.
And here I am like 70 feet underground and all I can see is fascia. Mm-hmm. And when you look at somebody like Dr. Zapatero and how he talks about the CSF, it's everything is in concert.
Yeah.
Everything is just opening and closing and living and dying at a rhythm.
Yeah.
To me, the whole time I listened to that podcast with you and him, I was just waiting for him to talk about the rhythms.
Yeah. Did he end up talking about the rhythms? Okay.
No. The whole time I was like, man, me and this guy would really get along.
Yeah.
It's a flow.
Yeah.
And when you talk about, if we go back to that engineer approach, right? If you talk about magnetic, how we measure magnets is something called Gauss strength. Mm. So if something can reach an inch, it's got 1 Gauss. If it can reach 2 inches, it's 2 Gauss, right? And we understand that our phone is electrical and it's magnetic, and it can perceive information from 8 feet outside of our phone. But most people aren't really ready to look at the body as a magnet that can collect information from outside of it, right? However, we are flowing fluids in a pocket. And as these fluids are moving through this pocket and the fluids are charged electrically, it means that we would have also a Gauss strength.
Yeah.
That we would also have a system to not only push out, but receive information from. And I do feel like the fascia is going to assist people making that bridge from the biomechanical to the energetic. Mm-hmm. Because even as you experience a release of the fascia flow within your body, some people at first, they experience it as, okay, the adhesion is no longer there. But as you dive deeper and you start working on the deep fascial lines on the inside and you're 2-3 inches now underneath the skin, it feels much more like you are creating flow of fluid instead of a release of something that was solid. You're just activating a flow. You're just allowing things to open. And when we allow things to open down to the feet and we start to have way more of a charge with our mechanoreceptors more activated, our fascia more activated at the bottom of the foot, I believe that our electron uptake increases vastly. And when we start to have a more proper intake of this electron field, I think that you start to experience larger energy.
Mm-hmm.
I had the privilege of walking on the beach adjacent by accident to Wayne Dyer. And he was walking this way, I was walking this way. And he was about 80 feet away. And I had to stop talking to my friend because you could feel this guy was magic.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was around some sort of divine saint.
Totally see that with
There
him.
was a charge and we didn't speak until he was 80 feet away from us. And it was like, who was that guy?
You didn't even know who it was?
No,
Wow.
he was just some guy taking a sunrise walk. And, you know, we were going one way, he was going the other. But his charge was huge. And you can feel it. You can kind of feel it when you're around, you know, Tiger Woods. I've been able to get pretty close to him. Hulk Hogan. I've had some moments where, you know, you can kind of feel when somebody's occupying more space than they are. And Wayne Dyer was my favorite. Wayne Dyer. It was unbelievable to feel how big his charge was all by himself. I didn't even know who he was. And it was massive. And that to me is our capacity.
Yeah.
It's our capacity to connect with everything around us by opening up our awareness. To me, I don't think people are aware of how much tension has been locked into their body.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not our fault. We didn't know how to brush our teeth until we were taught 100 years ago. You know, now we're going to learn how to brush our fascia. And when we do it, it's going to change our electrical energy. It's going to change our magnetic energy. It makes us, to me, fully functional. And I told my strategist, I was like, they were saying, what do you want to call this? I'm like, electromagnetic training. This is electromagnetic frequency training. They're like, well, nobody's looking for that online.
A lot of people are now.
Yeah.
More and more people are. Yeah.
But that's truly where my heart's at. I mean, to me, if the brain's capable of operating at 100 hertz, what can we do if we can maintain that? What can we do if we could hang out there for 3 hours? You and I could drop into a sequence and be at our most optimal creative selves together. To me, it's just a sequence.
With everything that you're saying with respect to the breath, and I feel like what you're getting at is we need to become more aware of our bodies, essentially, just like of our full system of who we are. And I love that your system, like several other fascial systems that I've seen, but I think yours is really special, but it starts in the feet. And I think it's because we don't bring enough awareness to our feet. And I love that you said that allows us to possibly receive more negative charge from the earth, which gives us more cellular energy, more potential energy of our bodies, and like greater capacity for expansion of our field and of who we are as an expression of life. And so with your breath practices, I wonder, especially because yesterday when I brought up Qigong, you sort of perked up and you're like, oh, like you showed a fascination for that because I practice Qigong. And that's the way that I have come to practice Qigong from my teacher, Dr. Edith Ubuntu Chan, does incorporate movement, but it is very breath-based. And it's breath-based with specific focus on bringing your awareness to different dantians. So like you have the primary dantian, which is your like in your lower abdomen, and then you have your heart, your head, your hands, and your feet. And what I love about this meditative breath practice is that you're bringing awareness to your full body rather than traditional meditation. There's nothing wrong with traditional meditation, but it oftentimes is largely focused on just the mind, right? And this is a focus on the full body. So I guess what I'm asking here is that given your awareness of fascia and given your awareness and understanding of breath work and its importance and sort of merging the two together, are your breath practices focused on extending your breath throughout your entire body?
I am about the mightiness of the breath. And it could be slow, it could be fast. So I look at like an engineer. We're gonna put that engineer back on. When you look at the lung field, there's a couple things to take into consideration. We want clean lungs. So I do a detox sequence that helps clear the lungs, any particles that have been stuck. Then what we do is we create flexibility around the muscles. And I want to show you how to move those muscles out and in so that you have control over how the breath moves. And then I want to make these muscles strong so that it can keep increasing in capacity. So again, coming back to that metric, most untrained lung field can hold 5 to 7 cubic liters. If you're at a 90-second breath hold, you're probably around 7 cubic liters. my goal is to double everybody's breath hold that works with me. It takes about 6 weeks, 5 days a week of training for a 10-minute sequence. So my sequences are built for entrepreneurs that are very busy, athletes and artists that are very busy. So I make efficient sequences. So when people train with me, you learn the science, you learn the why, you learn how to talk to the tension within the lung field, just like we do with the fascia. Work with the tension because it's always communicating something back. And then creating expansion where there is tension. So when I meditate, it's nothing to do with my sequences. But in my membership, I have a course that's unreleased to everybody else, and it's called Brain Harmony. And I have a philosophy that hasn't yet been experimented with. And I'm very excited to release my album. I'm in the middle of recording a cymatics album right now. And it's going to be 20-minute songs and very different songs. Some just natural, some very microtonal. And the goal is to sequence people's breath rate with that. And I know if some people have come out with like really cool breath albums and such, but mine is going to have no words. It's going to be communicated only through sound. And the thought is that when we're speaking, right, we're operating at a certain brainwave. When it's only sound, we can drop deeper. So when I practice meditation, I'm falling into a 1 breath a minute rate. Sometimes if I need to charge up, like if I've been in front of the computer a lot that day, I will go and do that outside, laying on the ground with nothing but cotton between me and the earth. Sometimes I go under a group of really old trees, and I do feel like the electron uptake from underneath old trees is significantly bigger. Same like when we're walking along the shoreline of the ocean, there is a lot of extra particles when we have a little bit of moisture mixed in with conductive surfaces. And I do feel like there are areas that you can go and lay in grass, right? But if you go and lay underneath a tree, it's different. You can kind of resonate off of all of the magnetism of those trees. Yeah. And when I do my breath pattern, it's about slowness. And in the slowness, I'm allowing everything to sync up with the frequency of the earth. So when we look at Tai Chi, right? You breathe, because that's more of my experience. You breathe with motion, right? And when you're exhaling, you're releasing that motion. So there's a conversation between your breath and the field around you. Yeah. And that's what you're tapping into. And it's funny because, you know, as somebody who's had so many coaches, almost nobody talks about their breath while you're doing something until you're powerlifting. Until you have 300 pounds and then you're like, okay, you're going to inhale on your way down. You're going to exhale on your way up.
That's the only time I've ever heard there's 2 situations. One at the free throw line in basketball and then 2 on a squat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it should be everything. And when somebody learns combat, and I've always been so afraid to take a karate class because I play so many instruments, I'm like afraid of hurting my wrists. But when you throw a punch, they teach you how to exhale, you know, and then pop your segments straight so that you have the power of your full body, not just your tiny muscle groups. And when we think about Tai Chi and your breath and the motion, it makes me feel like static, isolated muscle exercises, or like I'm ring training right now. And I have the opportunity to work with some really amazing athletes that are also ring training. And we have these conversations and I'm like, are you breathing? They'll be upside down on their rings. And a lot of them hold their breath in order to perform some of these. And it's been hysterical conversations of, you know, when you're doing a muscle up, when are you exhaling and inhaling? Because the whole sequence is tough.
I would imagine that a lot of them aren't even really aware. Like when you ask them this, they're like, I've never really thought whether I'm breathing this component or not.
My coach, who's amazing on the rings, he holds his breath. And it's ironic because, you know, he's just like, okay, when you go upside down, you're in a 15-second breath hold. And they're using, because our breath, people don't realize, but the way that we learn how to walk as children is a chain sequence between our big toe, our pelvic floor, and our diaphragm. Our diaphragm, if we looked at a skeleton, is what's stabilizing our entire upper body. So when we're doing inversions, a lot of people stabilize the lower body by stabilizing the diaphragm in one position. And it's interesting when you start to if you train Tai Chi or Qigong, when you pair your breath with the movement, which is what they've done in a lot of Kung Fu, there is a different means that your body's communicating with you.
Mm.
Isn't it wonderful to breathe and move? I mean,
Oh my
I think
goodness.
a lot of people should have that experience because it locks you into a rhythm with your heart, your breath, your brain, your body.
Does. Yeah, totally does. Especially like on those more movement-based Qigong classes that I've done. Yeah, it absolutely does. You feel like you're in flow. It's incredible. So I feel like what you're getting at there was musical breathwork. Do you want to touch on that a little bit now too?
Yes. Musical Breathwork is my education company, and it's really devoted to revealing the sequences that exist within our body. And I called it musical because, a year ago, I really was a front woman for a band mostly, and I had my side business that I loved educating. I'm one of the few people that, walk around with, I would show up with a skeleton and a projector, and I just wanted to show people how much we can unlock the nervous system. And as I started to train people more, once you do 100 of the same classes, you're like, maybe I should film this. And it allows me to help more people. But I built my Gamma Seeker membership for people who want to train the fascia and the breath and their brainwaves simultaneously and unlock a deeper power within them. And the opportunity with the membership that I love is it gives me a means to check in with all my members every day. So instead of someone just buying the course and maybe falling off the bandwagon or forgetting about it, it allows me to prod them every week and say, hey, how's training going? How are you doing? What are you experiencing? Because as the fascia retunes, the body shifts a lot and the breath shifts a lot. So people that train within 6 weeks, there's a lot of different things that have happened, and it allows me to touch on them. And I really imagine our humanity is moving in a direction of an empowered state. We are at a precipice of a frequency revolution. And the frequency, to me, is no longer a woo-woo. It is scientifically driven into our biomarkers everywhere in our body. And the more that we can say, listen, your breath rate is a BPM, just like a kick drum would be on a song. And this BPM is going to control your heart rate, which is the kick drum of your whole circulatory system. And then that is going to trigger the resonance of your brain. And the brain is communicating in that same hertz frequency that everything else in sound is operating with. And that is going to tune the tension of the body. So it's musical breathwork because breath is the core. It's that first domino of all of our systems. At any point, we can drop our breath rate and we can change our heart, our brain, and our body. And many people, I think, are still under the illusion that health is something outside of them, that they need to take in something else. And what I want to show them is that if we work with the nature of the body, we can self-correct. But we need to first look at the body like an engineer. We need to deconstruct it a little bit and start to become more aware of how these rhythms are affecting us.
I think you just made it click in my head how it all makes sense now. So I was talking off camera with Rebecca, and I'm like, I don't feel like I'm thinking too hard. I'm just trying to like create a framework of how the cerebral spinal fluid ties in with the fascia, ties in with the biofield, ties in with the breath and fourth phase water. And here's what I'm going to push to you, and I want you to answer yes or no or fill in the gaps. Okay. I'm sorry for those listening or watching. This is just how my mind works. I'm obsessed about this. So when we breathe deeply and we breathe appropriately and we do that consistently, we're accessing gamma brainwaves if we're really good at it. No?
Gamma right now was when we first look at neuroscience, the way that they were evaluating our brain was by putting people on this electroencephalogram, which is a bunch of microphones on the brain. And after several thousand people, they started to see the patterns. And the patterns were, our brains are very different. However, there's 5 basic patterns that exist. And these patterns are measured in a frequency. So when we're sleeping, we're in delta, 0.3 to 2 hertz, 3 hertz. And then as we wake up, we're in theta, 4 to 7.
Right.
And then as we start to remember, oh, today's Tuesday, we have a podcast to do. I have to do these things. I have to get up and go to the bathroom. Let me visualize my day. That's alpha. That's 8 to 15. That's where I feel like a lot of standard meditations bring you. You're nice, you're calm, but you're listening. So you're still projecting onto your mind. You're still controlling your mind.
But gamma is where you're accessing like that stillness though, right?
Gamma is 31 to 100 hertz.
Mhm.
So a lot of practitioners that I see out there that are flirting with it are using patterns to pop the brain over.
Mhm.
And what's been really overlooked is something called a theta-gamma sync. And
Okay.
so there's a bridge between our theta brainwave patterns and gamma.
Mhm.
And I believe that this has been used by inventors for the last century.
Mhm.
When you look at how Tesla talked about how he dealt with a problem, and how Thomas Edison dealt with a problem, how Einstein dealt with a problem, how Henry Ford dealt with a problem. These were men that didn't really have partners in their research and development labs. When they had a problem, they were often told, hey, abandon that. That's a stupid idea anyway. So they had to go internal. And a lot of them had a sequence that looked a lot like this. They would put a tennis ball in their hand or something in their hand, or they would tip back on a chair. And they often said the same thing, and that was they would bring the problem to their mind. And I love that phrase because we often, when we have a problem, go to a computer. We go to OpenAI, we go to Google and say, what's our problem? They would go internal. And these men have trained their brains to take in information. Tesla spoke like 7 languages. And what they would do is they would bring the problem to their mind, and then they would relinquish the solution. And they would drop into a slow brainwave pattern. And a lot of them had this like special chair or their napping closet.
Mm-hmm.
And as they were drifting off into a nap, the chair would move slightly or they would drop the tennis ball. In between the falling asleep, like that low theta, and the jarring awake, they could pop into gamma.
Yeah. This is what I'm getting at. Okay. I just don't have the right words to articulate it. So gamma, for lack of a better term and for all intents and purposes, is like dropping into like deep connection with God. That is we are inherently connected to God, universe, creator, whatever you want to call it, but it's dropping into that connection outside of our conscious mind, let's say, to some degree, right? Okay. So knowing that for those who are able to access those states, it's likely that cerebral spinal fluid is flowing unimpeded up and down our spinal column, right? Possibly, this is me saying this, I don't have any evidence to back this up, that cerebral spinal fluid is then extending or at least imprinting on our fascial system, causing it to sort of relax and break these adhesions possibly, or just not even focus on breaking adhesions, but allowing that flow of the hydrolonic, I can never say that word, hydrolonic acid? Hyaluronic
You were
acid.
so close.
I keep wanting to say hydrochloric acid. I'm like, that's not the same thing. Hyaluronic acid, okay, to impede or to just flow throughout our fascial system, right? So what I'm getting at is when we are dropping into gamma, that cerebral spinal fluid is flowing unimpeded up and down our spinal column. Mauro Zapatera and other people who study CSF think that that is our link to God, to the divine. And that, again, is not our primary link, but that is like one of the links, one of the main links of us as human beings to God, whatever we want to call it, the creator, whatever. And so when we're in that gamma brainwave state, the cerebral spinal fluid, which is our link to God, is flowing up and down throughout our body, which means that that is then imprinting on the 4th phase water in our body, taking that imprint of God unimpeded through our bodies, imprinting our water, right? Our 4th phase water through all of our cells, which then causes our fascia to sort of be more flowy, for lack of a better term, which then extends out into our biofield, causing our field to expand. And yeah, I think that's kind of how it all works, I think. Maybe. I don't know.
Me neither. But we're going to discover it
Okay.
together. I'm in constant experimentation. Like I look at my membership as experiment. We're all in it together. And if gamma is where we can be, let's move in that direction. I often feel in the core of my being, in the crux of my guts, that cymatics and how sound influences our brain is going to be a big kicker for us activating gamma in a sequence. So to me, it's cool if we start to expand, if we can hold gamma for 3 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes. This is going to be a whole, that's going to be, 100,000% more than most people are experiencing if we can maintain it for 5. There is this interesting thing, completely side note, when people meditate a lot, when they've done cadaver studies on their brain, they see that the brain is significantly more wrinkled than the standard brain. And when we look at the wrinkles in the brain, I call those beta high waves. So like as muscle memory for athletes, when you're doing something repetitively and you're training yourself to hold certain positions and postures, you're embedding that memory into the body of how to activate that posture. Like if you're an opera singer, how to pull the soft palate up that high while you're doing all of these other things. And when we meditate, if we're able to create more of those wrinkles in our brain, it means, I believe, that we have more memory stored in every part of our being. Have you ever like opened a medicine cabinet and caught something?
Yeah.
But you didn't consciously
Right.
even process that something was falling and your body responded? I wonder how much information is stored as an athlete in our body.
Yeah.
In our ability to respond without conscious effort. And it's been really fun to train gymnastics as an adult with the fascia research in my body, because that whipping reaction when you throw something, or as a golfer when you're coming from a stagnant position into violence, I wonder how much more our consciousness is attached to our full body. How much memory is in my hands alone for playing guitar in this hand or in a harp. Like when I have a harp in front of me, you're just changing positions. So somebody that plays one instrument, to me, it's very easy to start stacking because you're just dealing with patterns and you're teaching your brain how to work those patterns on different hands in a different structure, but it's kind of the same language over and over. And when we meditate, if a meditative brain has more of these wrinkles, I wonder if the CSF fluid has more things to touch, has more things to lodge into, has more things to create more information out of. You know, as we expand, when somebody learns the drums, you learn how to be bipedal with your hands, and it does this very interesting thing to your brain. So I wonder, even if for people to experience gamma, if we need to train both sides of the brain, both hemispheres. The easiest way to do this is spinal twists. You know, or cross crawl pattern in a child. When we're crawling, when we're doing spinal twists, we're activating both hemispheres. So when we think of CSF fluid and its flow, what we want it to do is to touch everything. And we do that by breathing deeply. The breath is the controller of the CSF fluid, period. But the ability for the CSF fluid to touch everything and to make it into something like magic, like a symphony in our brain, I feel like our brain potentially needs to be trained. You know, dual hemispheres. Do we need to, train this ear to open to have the same experience as this ear? You know, and our ears are very interesting. Even how the eardrum works itself, how it perceives frequency. We have a tiny little bone that's holding onto a water sac, and most people think of sound waves as like, I hit this particle and this particle travels to your ear, but it's not. I hit this particle and that particle bumps into another one that moves it ever so slightly. And it's a ripple. Sound is a ripple. I feel like the CSF fluid that's moving in this rhythm, and that all of our circulation systems are moving, if we can create an optimal flow, our magnetism ripples farther out, if that makes any sense.
No, that totally makes sense.
That's the marriage that I see. The CSF fluid is this pump of inner light, really. Yeah. And we want it to touch everything, but we can train the brain to have more things for it to touch.
I wonder, maybe you're aware of this, of something like this. Has there been any studies done where they take an athlete who is, one of the best athletes in their respective sport, and hook them up to these sort of microphones? What are they called again?
The electroencephalogram was the old school model. They
EEG, essentially. Okay, so they hook them up to an EEG while they are performing their craft, and they are articulating that they're in sort of a flow state. Do you know what brainwave state they're in when they're in this sort of flow state? Because a lot of athletes will describe that when they're in this flow state, they're not consciously thinking about their next move whatsoever. It's just naturally coming to them. Is there any evidence that they're in some sort of theta-gamma bridge or like gamma
Wow.
brainwave state?
What a beautiful question. I would love to know more. What I have seen, and I'm not done reading the book, so I don't have it I don't have the data right in my brain, but Jeff Strong is a polyrhythm expert, and he did long-term studies with autistic and disabled kids with playing the drum at very particular time signatures, unusual time signatures for us Americans who are used to hearing just 4/4 everything. And he found that polyrhythms changed people's brains in about a 20-minute period of time passively, just like some background music. Now, he did an interesting study with drummers. Drummers have trained their brains and their feet to work separately.
Yeah.
So they have limb independence that most of us can't really fathom. And at a high-end drummer level, they do have some very interesting research of how they're able to use 4 different hemispheres simultaneously. But I don't have those stats for you. But great question.
I'd be really interested in that because there's so many athletes that describe, and I can even say for myself whether I'm giving a lecture or even back in my athletic career, when I was playing really well, I was in just this like total flow state. And it felt like my conscious mind was not there at all. I was like fully just an automaton in a good way, just acting, I guess you could say, as an extension of God. I felt like God was fully flowing through me. So I'd be really interested to see what brainwave state I was in or what these athletes were in at that time. And like if they were in some sort of like partial gamma brainwave state.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm going to look up later today.
Okay,
So
yeah,
thanks for the
know.
question.
Yeah, let me know.
Are you familiar with the word enthusiasm, like what it means?
I know what enthusiasm is, but I don't know how to describe it. What does it actually mean?
Possession by God.
Wow.
I know that, to me, that's the energy that we are vibing into our highest selves. It's when we don't have to eat and we don't have to sleep and we are just fueled by some other faucet within us.
Yeah.
You've said it a few times and I'm like, wow, you're a man who seeks enthusiasm. I love that.
Yeah. The other thing I want to touch on with respect to breath is, have you thought about the possibility that breathing has nothing, or I guess not nothing, little to do with breathing in oxygen, but more with charging our lungs, like charging our, like, rather than oxygenating our blood, it's us breathing in the ether, and that is then charging our bodies rather than breathing in oxygen and being, on a molecular level, we're breathing in oxygen.
Well, if we talk about like the spiritual approach of breath, it's the most intimate thing we do. When we walk into a space and we inhale the air in that space, we are connecting part of us to the charged particles of that room. So if it's a smoky bar, you inhale that, you are becoming resonant with that energy. If you walk into, underneath a waterfall and you breathe in that, you are partially inhaling that substrate, that energy, that ether. Absolutely.
Yeah. Right, like maybe rather than the particles of that thing, you're breathing in the energetic imprint of that thing, and that's the most important thing.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of any altar space, fire, earth, air, water, the act of breath, when we're conscious of it, becomes like a very intimate thing that we share. All of us in this room, we're sharing breath. Part of the particles that I'm exhaling, you're inhaling. And it becomes rather intimate when we think of breathing within a group of people, breathing within a space of people. And yeah, the breath itself, even when we go back to the Latin epistemology of it, respirar, to breathe in spirit. There are some people that think that we don't really inhabit the body at all, but we are a floating consciousness outside of it. And as we breathe, the depth of our breath determines how much our spirit can touch our soul.
Wow.
Can touch the body.
Wow. Wow.
It's fun to think of it that way, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So about enthusiasm, this seeking of being possessed by God, that energy of, being unceasing with our life force. To me, that is a very unique pattern for each of us. And I really love the archetypal philosophy. It's a lot like human design, except you pick it and you meditate on it. And in the archetypal philosophy, we are 12 archetypes. We are not one. And 4 of the archetypes are universal, and it's what keeps us alive: the prostitute, the victim, the saboteur, and the child. And a lot of people don't want to say, oh, I'm a prostitute. But what we don't realize is that that prostitute on its flip side, like on the polar, is our principles. So if somebody says, I want you to do this and I'm only going to pay you $1, the principled in you says, no, thank you. That's not my value. The victim lives within us to ask for help. If we were to break our leg, it's very automatic for us to reach out and call for help. But that same victim that lives within us is also the champion. So I like to think of the victim stands in the kitchen and says, there's nothing to eat here. And the champion stands in the same kitchen and says, I'm going to make the best out of what I have. Mm-hmm. The saboteur can destroy absolutely everything in our life. Most of us know a good saboteur, somebody that had the house, had the job, had the wife, and then threw it all the way because they felt they were off path. But the saboteur wants to keep us on path more than anything. And when we flip that upside down, because we're in alignment with what we're supposed to do, the saboteur is like the lieutenant general of organization. I like to call the saboteur's polar the organized. And it's the thing that says to you when you're leaving for the gym, make sure you bring water, make sure you bring that extra pair of clothes because you have a meeting after. Mm. And the child in you, when it's sad, is a sad child that kind of feels entitled and demands, and a happy child gives. And then the other 8 archetypes are for someone to pick for themselves. And when I guide someone through this, I always say, read the glossary. It's 136. Just read it passively and then witness yourself. Witness how you communicate with people. Witness what you're doing when you're recovering your energy. Witness how, what you do at the end of a busy workday that makes you feel comfortable. Because people have locked into these rhythms of they come home from work and they turn on their television and their life feels empty. And I teach them how to breathe and I teach them how to open their fascia, their awareness builds, and then they feel kind of out of place with their life. And my next sequence that I'm like, all right, well, you ready for this next thing is archetypes. And it builds a blueprint. So once they pick their sacred 12 and all of their soul has shown up, these are the things that I'm doing when I am the happiest. These are the things that I'm doing that I did as a kid, but I've forgotten to do as an adult, but charged me up. So the artist, the king, the clown, the monk, the goddess, the engineer, the athlete, the Olympian, there's so many that compose what we are. And some of the differences are just slightly variable, but they matter. And when someone irons this out and says, okay, this is who I am, we merge those 12 with the astrological wheel. And it allows them to see what they need to do to feel grounded. What's the most important to them? Like our second house is our life values. Our third house is our self-expression. Our fourth house is our home. It's where we feel charged up. Some of us have juxtaposition archetypes. So for instance, I am both a networker, which desires to bring disparate groups of people and ideas together. And I am simultaneously a nun in my house of spirituality. So I feel my deepest connection to the divine when I'm alone and isolated. And I've had periods of my time where I've been deeply entrenched in my nun and ignored my networker. And then other times where I've deeply socialized and allowed too much access and ignored my nun. And when we have a blueprint of all of this in front of us, we can navigate our rhythms a little more consciously and build our life around the things that are giving us energy back. So because I believe in resonance, right? And resonance being you apply, let's just say one charge. I'm thinking of a crystal bowl, right? So if I ever so slightly just hit a crystal bowl like this, but I continued that pace, that rhythm will build the waves within the bowl itself. And that's how I feel like our souls are. Mm. So if we build our breath, we build the fascia, and then we build our blueprint, we start to organize our lives around the thing that give us energy. That to me is where the resonant capacity of gamma is. Because if you can do all of the right things, if you are off path, the universe will do nothing but push you in uncomfortable ways back on path. But if we have our little blueprint and we can sit with making this blueprint with the insides of our core and say, okay, what am I here to do? How can I best serve? It's not all about health. It's about our expression here. Mm. So we start with the breath, we start with the fascia, but it's really about all of us playing our part here. That to me is the frequency revolution. You know, it's like, okay, great, you feel great in your body, but are you doing your work?
Ooh.
Are you showing up the way that you're supposed to show up? Because if we all play our part, we can live in heaven. It's when we're off path and we feel tight in our body and we feel stuck in our breath and our breath is shallow and we lose that sense of mightiness. And when we feel weak, and then when we feel weak, it's hard to show up for others. It's hard not to be a victim. So when we're deconstructing the victim and we're giving our bodies the tools and our brains the tools to access our highest self, now how do we show up for the world? What do we have to give? And I think that when you're talking about enthusiasm in God that way, it's you're on path. You're playing your part. And if you and I can sit here and inspire others to play their part, we're doing it.
Yeah, beautiful.
You know, we're just one small chink in this giant web together, you know? And if we can emanate that kind of light and others can reach on to that, that's when we can resonate off of each other. And that's when things start to happen really quick.
For those who are listening and watching, where can they find more info about those archetypes?
At musicalbreathwork.com, I only do private sessions for them. I've had a hard time trying to find a way to create total quality in a group setting. But I have a pretty low price point.
Is it tailored to the individual on that one?
Yeah, and it's deeply personal.
Because it's based in an individual chart.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And I think that there'll be a way in the next year that I find a way to take on 30 people. I've done it before over like a 6-week period of time. But right now, it's just private sessions. And I do it with some of my Gamma Seeker members that are ready for it. Absolutely.
Amazing. And I guess this is the last question. Can you share some of the testimonies of people who've joined your membership and have started doing your breathwork practices and then also your fascial techniques?
Absolutely.
What they've experienced.
On the low end, like people who don't really commit to training, but they only do a little bit, I often get them out of knee braces. So if somebody's been, having a real chronic injury with, inflamed joints, that tends to go away even with just kind of half-assed training, honestly.
And you're talking like anyone from someone who's just working a desk job to someone who's an athlete, like a full-time athlete.
Absolutely. And it's such a pleasure to have the assortment that work with me, like World Cup soccer players and professional hockey players, and then, 85-year-olds that are just trying to not hobble on cobblestones. But joint pain tends to go away. Recovery for workouts, that's the first thing that people notice as a change. But even people that just explore a little bit with me, they often have deep relief in their lower body relatively quickly. My parents are a great example. They train very seldom and they both don't have their knee pain anymore. It only took about 2 weeks for them. My videographer, I love him. He only does his feet and his knee pain went away. I'm just like, Alex, come on, there's so much more.
Yeah.
And then my stellar students, I love them. My ambitious retirees that are like, I've trained with you. They pull up their journal and they're like, okay, on day 115. So David and my homegirl Josephine, they send me borderline nudes because they're in their 60s and they've had crepey skin. And because they're dumping so much hyaluronic acid into their body, their skin all over their body starts to shift.
Wow. So they reverse age essentially.
Yeah. Eye prescriptions are changing, which I don't really have my head wrapped around yet, but the eye is made of mostly collagen. So people are realizing, okay, I've had extreme fascia tension on one side of my body, and then that's the same eye that has the extreme prescription as this release, this divided in half. And I would barely believe it, but it happened to me. I've been doing eye exercises trying to get my vision corrected since I was in my 20s, and I'd go back to my eye exam and they'd be like, no, you're worse. And I'm like, okay, well, screw it. And I went back just 6 months ago and got new glasses and my astigmatism was gone.
Wow.
And my prescription was reduced in half. And the only thing that I did different was fascia flow.
Wow.
So the people that train tandem fascia and breath, often there's so much flow that's created within the system. Sometimes they'll kind of dislodge some old stuff and get kind of a little quick fever for a couple days. And most of them are just like, whoa, I know this was dislodged from my body. And then those are the same people that end up saying their dreams have shifted. their, psychic abilities that they had as a kid start to kind of pop back online. Some of them are like a little concerned. They'll reach out, be like, is this normal? I'm having prophetic dreams. This only happened as a kid. And I'm like, oh, welcome to the next level.
Incredible.
So, I mean, the magnetism of the body is all about the flow and the circulation. So when we start to attack the flow and circulation and we start to charge that up and strengthen it, there's kind of no telling what can happen for people. It's exciting to watch and a privilege really to work with people and see people that resonate with this work so deeply.
Incredible. So I know this episode was a lot of like conceptual discussion, and I think that it would be really appropriate if this was fascinating to you, and I hope that it was, that you join Brooke's membership and, consume some of her lectures and do some of her fascial flows, because I think that's where the money is. It's actually experiencing this for yourself. So, this was amazing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I really appreciate the work that you're doing and the network that you're building. It's amazing. I mean, you're bridging a lot of gaps and fusing a lot of things, and it's a privilege to link arms with you, brother.
Yeah, amen.